I was sitting in my car on the way to my grandfather's will reading when a homeless man pounded on my window. "Do not put that car in drive," he gasped. "Your father was just under it." My blood ran cold as I stepped out and saw the puddle of brake fluid beneath my tires. 3 days later, when I walked into the lawyer's office, my adoptive parents collapsed when they saw exactly who was standing right behind me. My name is Maya. I am 35 years old. Before I tell you how a severed brake line led to the ultimate destruction of my toxic adoptive family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against the people who were supposed to protect you. The leather seat of my Mercedes felt cool against my back as I adjusted my tailored suit jacket. I turned the key, and the engine purred to life, a steady hum that usually grounded me before high-stakes meetings. Today was the reading of Grandpa Jeremiah's will. He was the only person in my adoptive family who had ever looked at me with genuine love. I gripped the steering wheel, preparing to shift into drive, when a heavy fist pounded violently against my driver's side window. I flinched, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing outside my door was Silas. He was a man most people in my upscale Atlanta neighborhood would cross the street to avoid. His coat was tattered, his beard unkempt, and his face weathered by years of hard living. But I knew Silas. He used to sweep the floors at Grandpa Jeremiah's barbershop when I was a little girl hiding from my adoptive parents. Right now, Silas was panting heavily, his eyes wide with a terror that instantly set off alarms in my head. I rolled the window down just an inch. "Maya," he gasped, his voice raspy and desperate, "do not put that car in drive. Your father was just here. He was under it." I immediately killed the engine and stepped out of the car, ignoring how the pristine fabric of my pantsuit brushed against the dirty asphalt. I crouched down, peering into the shadows beneath the chassis. A steady dark drip of brake fluid was pooling onto the concrete driveway, forming a toxic puddle right near my front tires. The line had not just ruptured, it had been cleanly severed. Before the reality of the sabotage could fully sink in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a text message from my adoptive mother, Vivian. I opened it, and the words practically dripped with her signature venom. "Do not bother showing up to Mr. Sterling's office today, Maya. Grandpa's money is for real family. If you do not show, you forfeit your share by default. Drive safe. Drive safe." The casual cruelty of those two words made my stomach churn. She knew. She absolutely knew what my adoptive father, Calvin, had just done to my car. They were perfectly willing to let me crash, to let me die on the Atlanta interstate just to secure their grip on Grandpa Jeremiah's estate. But this was not a new dynamic. This level of viciousness had been their standard operating procedure for as long as I could remember. Reading that text, I was instantly transported back to my high school graduation. I had earned the title of valedictorian, a massive achievement for an adoptive kid they constantly belittled. But when it was time for me to walk to the podium, my speech was missing. Vivian had deliberately thrown it in the trash, ensuring that my golden child sister Vanessa, who was merely introducing the principal, got all the spotlight and the family photographs. I had to stand on that stage in front of hundreds of people, humiliated and stumbling over my words, while Vivian smiled from the front row with the exact same cold satisfaction radiating from this text message. They had always treated me like a disposable accessory, a prop they used to secure their adoption subsidy, and then pushed aside when I dared to outshine their biological daughter. But I was no longer the helpless 20-year-old girl they had kicked out of the house with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes. I did not panic. I did not scream or break down in tears. At 35, I was the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Auditing. I spent my days dissecting corporate fraud, tracking embezzled funds, and dealing with high-stakes sabotage for Fortune 500 companies. A severed brake line was just another form of corporate sabotage, only this time it was personal. I pulled up my contacts and made 2 phone calls. The first was to a specialized private towing company that handled high-end vehicles with absolute discretion. The second was to a trusted forensic mechanic I kept on retainer for my firm's more sensitive investigations. I needed that brake line preserved exactly as it was. I needed a paper trail photographic evidence and a legally binding assessment of the tampering. Calvin thought he was dealing with the timid girl he used to bully. He had no idea he had just handed a loaded weapon to a financial predator. For years, I had kept my success a closely guarded secret. My adoptive family believed I was a struggling administrative assistant, barely scraping by in a tiny apartment. They had no idea I had built an empire from the ground up. Apex Financial Auditing was known across the East Coast for tearing down corrupt executives and exposing hidden financial crimes. I had specifically chosen to keep Vivian and Calvin entirely in the dark about my wealth. I knew that if they discovered how much money I had, they would either demand access to it or find a way to destroy it, just as they had destroyed everything else I had ever loved. The only person who had known the truth about my firm was Grandpa Jeremiah. He used to sit in his barber shop, a pillar of our local African American community, and listen to me talk about my business plans. He was the one who taught me about resilience, about the importance of building my own legacy when my adoptive parents refused to give me a foundation. He always told me that true wealth was not in the bank account, but in the strength of your character. His barber shop was a safe haven where I did not feel like an unwanted outsider. Now Calvin was trying to murder me to steal the very legacy Grandpa had promised to protect. I looked back down at Vivian's text message. They wanted me out of the picture so desperately that they were willing to commit vehicular manslaughter. They wanted to divide Grandpa Jeremiah's assets, pop champagne, and celebrate my absence. I typed my reply with steady fingers. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I hit send and slid the phone back into my pocket. Then I turned my attention back to Silas. He was still standing there, shivering slightly in the morning air, watching me with a mixture of concern and awe. He had just saved my life. If he had not been keeping an eye on my property, if he had not recognized Calvin creeping around my driveway in the early hours of the morning, I would be a tragic headline on the evening news. I reached into my purse and pulled out my solid Platinum Company card. I stepped forward and pressed it firmly into his rough, calloused hand. Silas looked down at the heavy metal card, then up at me, completely bewildered. "Clean yourself up, Silas," I said, my voice calm and absolute. "Go to the best tailor downtown and buy yourself a suit. Get a haircut and a hot shave. Spend whatever you need. We have a will reading to attend in 3 days, and you are going to be my star witness." I watched Silas slip the platinum card into his worn pocket. He gave me a slow nod of understanding. Silas had always been fiercely loyal to Grandpa Jeremiah, and by extension, he was loyal to me. He had seen how Calvin treated his own father, how he looked down on the working-class folks who frequented the barber shop, despite Calvin himself coming from those exact same roots. Silas knew this was about more than just a car. It was about righting a wrong that had been festering in this family for decades. I watched the private tow truck pull into my driveway, the flashing yellow lights reflecting off the hood of my damaged car. The driver stepped out, ready to transport the vehicle straight to my forensic mechanic. I knew the next 72 hours would require precision timing and absolute focus. I had to audit my own family. I had to tear through their financial records, uncover their hidden motives, and prepare a trap so inescapable that when the jaws snapped shut, they would lose everything they valued. Vivian and Calvin thought they were playing a game of intimidation. They did not realize they had just sat down at a chessboard with a grandmaster. The fluorescent lights of the secure garage buzz above my head, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. Jackson, my most trusted forensic mechanic, wipes his grease-stained hands on a rag and shines a heavy-duty flashlight directly under the chassis of my Mercedes. He does not sugarcoat his assessment. The brake lines were snapped clean with a pair of industrial bolt cutters. He points to the jagged edge of the metal tube hanging uselessly from the undercarriage. He tells me this was not wear and tear. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to ensure my brakes failed completely the moment I hit highway speeds. It was attempted vehicular manslaughter. I stare at the severed line, inhaling the sharp metallic tang of pooled brake fluid mixed with engine oil. My adoptive father, Calvin, had crawled under my vehicle in the dead of night to guarantee I would not survive the trip to the lawyer's office. I step away from the car and take a seat on a cracked leather stool in the corner of the garage, opening my encrypted tablet. As the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Auditing, I have spent my entire adult life dismantling corrupt corporate executives. I know exactly how to track desperate people because desperate people always leave a financial paper trail. I send a secure message to David, my lead investigator back at the firm. I instruct him to initiate a total digital sweep on Calvin and Vivian, including their shell companies' hidden assets and offshore liabilities. Within 20 minutes, the data begins populating on my screen in real time. The numbers tell a story of absolute ruin. Calvin has been making frantic, erratic cash withdrawals from his primary accounts over the last 4 weeks. 10,000 here, 25,000 there. He is bleeding cash to plug massive holes in a rapidly sinking ship. Watching those negative balances flash across my screen zeroes out any lingering shred of familial guilt I might have harbored. The sheer audacity of his financial theft perfectly mirrors a Tuesday morning 17 years ago. I was 18 years old, standing in the immaculate foyer of their pristine house, clutching an acceptance letter to a top-tier out-of-state university. I had logged into the student portal to pay my enrollment deposit, only to find my entire college savings account completely drained. Every single penny of the state adoption subsidy they had promised to save for my education was gone. When I confronted Calvin, he did not even look up from his newspaper. He coldly stated that I was too emotionally unstable to handle moving across the country and that they needed the funds to renovate the kitchen. He told me I lacked the pedigree for a prestigious school anyway and should settle for a local community college. That theft forced me to work 3 grueling jobs, taking night classes and teaching myself forensic accounting until my eyes burned and my hands shook from exhaustion. They thought they had buried me under their neglect. Instead, they handed me the exact blueprint I needed to build my auditing empire from scratch. My tablet chimes with a new batch of intercepted documents pulling me back to the present. David has bypassed their standard banking firewalls. The reality of Calvin and Vivian's current financial status is far worse than I anticipated. They are completely drowning in hidden debt. Their country club memberships are months in arrears. Their secondary mortgages are in default, and their credit lines are maxed out entirely. They desperately need Grandpa Jeremiah's estate just to avoid federal bankruptcy charges and potential prison time for tax evasion. Grandpa Jeremiah had always seen right through their superficial perfection. He knew they viewed me as a prop, a charity case they paraded around their upscale social circles for praise, while emotionally starving me in private. He was the only one who recognized my drive. Calvin and Vivian must have discovered that Grandpa structured his will to protect my interests. They assumed that eliminating me, the only person Grandpa actually trusted, would remove the final legal hurdle, giving them default control over his entire liquid fortune. The heavy metal door of the garage groans open, letting in a rush of humid air. David steps inside, brushing the dust off his suit jacket. He walks over to my corner and hands me a thick manila folder, completely bypassing digital security protocols for this specific piece of intel. He tells me I am going to want to see what my brother-in-law used as collateral last month. Trevor is my golden child sister Vanessa's husband. He is a pretentious white wealth manager who has made a sport out of treating me like the hired help at every family gathering. He constantly boasts about his pristine financial portfolios and elite clientele. I open the heavy folder and begin scanning the densely packed spreadsheets. The documents detail a catastrophic offshore crypto scheme that has completely collapsed. Trevor used Calvin's commercial real estate portfolio as illegal leverage to cover his massive losses without Calvin even knowing. A cold, deeply satisfying smile spreads across my face as I close the folder. The trap is perfectly set. The heavy oak doors of Mr. Sterling's law office loom before me, solid and imposing. For 3 days, I have maintained absolute radio silence. I ignored every automated call from the local police station and deflected every superficial inquiry from extended relatives. I let Calvin and Vivian sit in the festering silence of their own making, fully believing their late-night mechanical sabotage had succeeded. Now standing in the polished marble hallway, I can hear the muffled sound of a champagne cork popping, followed by the clinking of crystal glasses. They are celebrating. They are literally toasting to my presumed death before Grandpa Jeremiah is even cold in the ground. I push the heavy oak doors open with a sharp, forceful shove. The heavy wood strikes the wall stoppers with a loud crack that instantly kills the laughter inside. The mahogany-lined conference room reeks of Vivian's signature overpowered floral perfume, a desperate attempt to mask the smell of her own greed. She is standing near the catered beverage cart holding a crystal champagne flute halfway to her lips. When her eyes meet mine, the glass slips from her manicured fingers. It hits the hardwood floor and shatters into 100 glittering pieces. Champagne splatters across the cuffs of her designer trousers, but she does not even flinch. She just stares at me as if a ghost has just walked out of the drywall. Calvin is seated near the center of the massive table. The color instantly drains from his face, leaving behind a sickly ash gray. The smug, victorious posture he held a second ago crumbles. He grips the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turn white. His jaw opens and closes twice before he manages to force out a sound. "Maya," he chokes out, his voice trembling violently. "You are alive." He realizes his mistake the second the words leave his mouth. He did not say "you are late." He did not say "where have you been?" His immediate knee-jerk reaction is shock that I am currently breathing oxygen. I keep my face perfectly neutral, letting his guilty admission hang in the sterile air of the law office. I want him to hear exactly what he just said. I want Mr. Sterling, who is sitting rigidly at the head of the table clutching a stack of legal documents, to hear it too. Vanessa, my golden child sister, is sitting opposite Calvin, completely blind to the sheer terror suffocating her parents. She sighs loudly, a sharp hiss of annoyance that breaks the heavy silence. She reaches up with a perfectly manicured hand and adjusts her designer pearls, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "Always so incredibly dramatic, Maya," she says, rolling her eyes. "You could not just be on time for once in your life, could you? You have to make an entrance. Just grab a chair in the back so we can finish dividing our family's assets. Trevor and I have a flight to catch this evening." Her use of the word "our" is deliberate. It is the exact same tone she used when we were 16, and she demanded the keys to the used sedan I had bought with my own waitressing money, claiming that since she was the real daughter, she had priority over the driveway space. Vivian had backed her up, handing my keys over to Vanessa without a second thought. Vanessa has spent her entire life believing my sole purpose is to serve as the invisible stepping stone for her pedestal. She gestures vaguely toward a folding chair near the coat rack, expecting me to shrink into the shadows like the obedient scapegoat they raised me to be. Trevor, her wealth manager husband, sits beside her, casually scrolling through his phone. He does not even bother looking up at me. He just swirls the champagne in his glass, his bespoke suit jacket draped carelessly over the back of his chair. He thinks this is a formality. He thinks I am just a nuisance delaying his payout. They all think I am still the terrified foster kid who used to hide in the pantry to avoid Calvin's explosive temper. I do not walk to the back of the room. I do not look at the folding chair. Instead, I walk with measured, deliberate steps directly toward the head of the enormous table. The click of my heels against the hardwood floor echoes like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of their comfortable reality. I place my sleek leather briefcase right next to Mr. Sterling's neatly organized piles of paper. "I apologize for the delay," I say, my voice calm, cold, and perfectly steady. "I had some unexpected car trouble this morning." I turn my head slowly and lock eyes directly with Calvin. The terror in his eyes is absolute. A bead of sweat traces a line down his temple, dropping onto his starched white collar. He knows I know. He can see it in my posture and the total absence of fear in my gaze. He is waiting for me to scream, to cry, to call the police. He is bracing for the emotional outburst they have always used to label me as unstable. I offer him a slow, razor-sharp smile. "But do not worry, Calvin. The severed brake lines have been carefully preserved as evidence." Calvin inhales sharply, choking on his own saliva. He coughs violently, his face turning a blotchy red as he grabs a linen napkin to cover his mouth. He knocks his own champagne glass over in his panic, sending a wave of pale liquid spilling across the legal documents in front of him. Vivian rushes forward, grabbing his arm, her eyes darting frantically between me and Mr. Sterling. "What are you talking about?" Vivian snaps her voice, pitching into a shrill, defensive shriek. "Breaks. Evidence. You are talking nonsense, Maya. You are clearly having another one of your episodes. Mr. Sterling, we need to proceed. She is clearly unwell." I ignore Vivian, completely keeping my eyes locked on Calvin, who is still coughing, desperately avoiding my gaze. I reach out and smooth the edge of my tailored jacket. "I am not having an episode, Vivian. I am simply clarifying why I missed the first 5 minutes of the reading. Please, Mr. Sterling, do continue. I would hate to delay Trevor and Vanessa's flight." Mr. Sterling clears his throat, pulling a fresh copy of the will from a sealed envelope. He looks deeply uncomfortable, sensing the explosive tension in the room, but he is legally bound to proceed. He adjusts his spectacles and looks down at the heavy parchment paper stamped with Grandpa Jeremiah's official seal. "Very well, Mr. Sterling," says his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "We will move to the primary commercial holdings." As I was stating before Maya arrived, Jeremiah left specific instructions regarding the operational control of his commercial real estate portfolio. This portfolio, as you all know, represents the bulk of his monthly revenue streams. Trevor finally looks up from his phone, a greedy smirk playing on his lips. Vanessa sits up straighter, practically vibrating with anticipation. This is the moment they have been waiting for. The real estate portfolio is the crown jewel of Grandpa's empire, an empire Calvin has been salivating over for a decade. Mr. Sterling continues reading the legal jargon. Jeremiah bequeaths the primary operational control and all associated revenue rights of the commercial real estate portfolio to his son Calvin. Calvin lets out a massive breath, the color rushing back into his face. He shoots me a look of pure, triumphant malice. He thinks he has won. He thinks that no matter what I know about the car, he now has the financial power to crush me in court, to hire the best lawyers to bury the evidence. Vivian lets out a loud, obnoxious sigh of relief, clapping her hands together. "However," Mr. Sterling says, raising his hand to silence Vivian's premature celebration, "there is a strict stipulation attached to this transfer of power." Jeremiah was very specific. The transfer of the real estate portfolio to Calvin is entirely contingent on the condition that the associated holding company is completely, entirely, and legally debt-free at the time of his passing. The room goes still again, but this time it is not a silence born of fear. It is a silence of supreme arrogance. Calvin leans back in his heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers together. The panic from a moment ago is entirely gone, replaced by the smug superiority of a man who believes he has outsmarted everyone. "Well, that is certainly not a problem," Calvin says, his voice dripping with condescension. "The holding company is perfectly clean. I personally had the accountants verify the ledgers just last month. There is not a single outstanding loan against those properties. The portfolio is mine." He looks at me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to realize that I have lost. He thinks I am just going to sit here and watch him take the empire that Grandpa built with his own 2 hands. I slowly reach down and unclasp the brass locks on my briefcase. The sharp click cuts through the quiet room. I reach inside and pull out a thick financial dossier bound in an ominous red cover. I hold it for a second, feeling the weight of their impending destruction in my hands, before I slide it smoothly across the mahogany table directly in front of Calvin. The heavy red folder sits like a bomb in the center of the mahogany table. Mr. Sterling adjusts his reading glasses, clearing his throat to break the suffocating silence. He refuses to look at the dossier, instead focusing entirely on the crisp parchment of Grandpa Jeremiah's will. "Moving on to the primary commercial real estate holdings," Mr. Sterling says, his voice echoing in the tense room. Jeremiah was extremely specific regarding this portfolio. He built his initial wealth through the barber shop, relying strictly on cash and sweat equity. He despised leverage. I remember Grandpa Jeremiah teaching me that exact lesson. I was 12 years old, sweeping up hair clippings for $5 a week. He used to point out the window at the flashy cars driving past his shop, telling me that true freedom meant owning what you had outright. He knew Calvin had a weakness for the appearance of wealth. Calvin always wanted the designer suits, the luxury vehicles, the country club memberships that screamed old money. He hated that his father was a humble barber who owned half the block but still drove a 10-year-old truck. Grandpa knew his son was reckless. That is exactly why this specific provision was written into the will. Therefore, he leaves the entirety of his commercial real estate operations to his son Calvin, with one absolute non-negotiable condition. Mr. Sterling continues, his eyes scanning the final lines of the paragraph. The operational control and all subsequent revenue rights belong to Calvin, provided that the holding company is completely, entirely, and legally debt-free at the time of my passing. Calvin exhales a loud, dramatic breath of relief. He actually reaches over and pats Vivian on the knee. The color fully returns to his face, replacing the ash-gray terror from just moments ago. He shoots me a look of pure, triumphant malice. He thinks he has won. He thinks the severed brake lines on my car were just a minor hiccup in his grand victory march. "Well, that is certainly not a problem," Calvin says, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. He straightens his tie and squares his shoulders, playing the role of the successful patriarch. The holding company is perfectly clean. I personally had my elite accounting team verify the ledgers just last month. We do not owe a single red cent to any bank anywhere. The portfolio is mine. He looks at me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to realize that I have lost. He thinks I am just going to sit here and watch him take the empire that Grandpa built with his own 2 hands. He expects me to shrink back into the terrified foster kid they brought into their home just to collect a state subsidy. I do not break down. I do not even blink. I slowly reach out and tap my manicured index finger against the ominous red cover of the dossier I just placed on the table. "Funny you should mention your elite accountants, Calvin," I say, my tone dangerously level, "because they seem to have missed a few critical details. Or perhaps you paid them specifically to look the other way." Calvin scoffs, crossing his arms over his chest. "Do not embarrass yourself, Maya. You do not know the first thing about high-level commercial real estate. You have been shuffling papers in some low-level clerk job for years. You are out of your depth." I slide the red folder closer to Mr. Sterling. I instruct the lawyer to open it. Mr. Sterling hesitates, but his legal obligation compels him to review the documents presented. He flips open the cover, and his eyes widen in sheer horror as he scans the top page. "I know that as of 8 o'clock this morning your entire portfolio is completely underwater," I state, projecting my voice so it reverberates off the wood-paneled walls. "I know that you set up 3 different offshore shell companies to bypass internal family audits. You funneled the profits from Grandpa's Southside apartment complexes directly into those shell accounts. Then you used those fraudulent companies to take out massive predatory mezzanine loans just to keep your lavish lifestyle afloat." Calvin's jaw drops. His arms fall to his sides. "You leveraged the strip mall on Fifth Avenue," I continue, relentless in my delivery. "You leveraged the corporate office buildings downtown. You even leveraged the historic brownstones Grandpa bought in the 70s. Your pristine portfolio is currently carrying exactly $12 million in toxic hidden debt." The room goes dead silent for the 3rd time today. Vanessa stops checking her reflection in her phone screen. Trevor shifts uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking very interested in the ceiling tiles. They are realizing that the foundation of their entire wealthy existence is completely rotten. Vivian slams her hands flat on the table, her designer rings clattering against the wood. "You are a liar!" She spits, her face twisting with ugly rage. "You have always been a bitter, jealous little liar. You resent us because we gave you a life you never deserved." Calvin is a respected businessman in this community. No legitimate financial institution would even allow that kind of covert leverage without massive oversight. And even if they did, who would be stupid enough to hold a $12 million debt on our properties? I look at Vivian, my expression absolutely frozen, in a cold, predatory smile. I slowly drag my finger across the gold-embossed Apex Financial Auditing logo stamped on the corner of the red folder. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to actually look at the emblem of my company. "I do," I say softly, letting the reality crush the air right out of her lungs. My firm bought your debt yesterday morning. You do not owe a bank, Vivian. You owe me. The silence that follows my declaration is absolute. It is the kind of quiet that only exists in a vacuum right before a massive explosion. Vivian stares at the gold-embossed logo of Apex Financial Auditing as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike her across the throat. Her mouth works wordlessly, but no sound comes out. Calvin looks physically ill. He slumps backward, his shoulders caving inward as the expensive leather of his chair groans under his sudden dead weight. He knows exactly what it means to have your debt bought out by a hostile entity. It means I hold the keys to his entire kingdom. I have the power to foreclose, to liquidate, to strip him of the carefully constructed illusion of wealth he has spent a lifetime curating. Before Calvin can muster a single word of defense, the illusion of control shatters from the opposite side of the table. Trevor pushes his chair back so violently it tips over and crashes against the hardwood floor. He slams both of his hands flat onto the polished mahogany table, rattling the champagne flutes and sending a rogue drop of liquor spilling over the rim. Trevor has always been a man who firmly believes his loud voice, his aggressive posture, and his expensive tailored suits make him the smartest person in any room. He leans forward, his face flushed with sudden aggressive indignation, his eyes narrowing into a glare designed to intimidate. "Listen here, you ungrateful charity case," Trevor snarls, his voice echoing harshly off the wood-paneled walls. "I personally audited Calvin's accounts. They are pristine. You are holding fake documents to extort the family that pulled you out of the foster system." He points a rigid finger directly at my face, utterly convinced of his own untouchable superiority. The sheer venom in his voice is designed to put me back in my place, to remind me that in his eyes I am nothing more than a stray dog they allowed into their home out of the goodness of their hearts. Charity case. The phrase hangs in the stale air of the conference room. It is a phrase Trevor loves to use. Hearing it now instantly transports me back to a Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago. We were sitting around their massive dining table, groaning under the weight of crystal glasses and silver platters. Trevor had just secured his position at a top-tier wealth management firm, and the entire family was treating him like royalty. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift at my entry-level accounting job and was exhausted. Trevor had looked at me down his nose, swirling his expensive wine. He smiled a cruel, mocking smile and told the entire table that Maya should be the one serving the food tonight. He loudly joked that I did not exactly have the real pedigree to participate in their high-level investment conversations. Calvin and Vivian had laughed uproariously at his joke. Vanessa had simply taken a delicate sip of her wine, not even bothering to look in my direction. I had stayed completely silent that night. I had swallowed the burning humiliation, cleared their dirty plates, and retreated to my tiny studio apartment. I spent that entire Thanksgiving night studying federal tax codes and forensic accounting methodologies until my vision blurred. I stayed silent back then because I was still building my armor. I was still sharpening my claws. I needed them to believe I was weak and defeated so they would never see me coming. Today, I do not stay silent. Today, I do not swallow a single drop of their disrespect. I look at Trevor, keeping my expression completely devoid of emotion. I do not raise my voice. I do not match his aggressive posturing. I simply reach back into my sleek leather briefcase. "You personally audited his accounts, Trevor," I say, my voice slicing through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "Is that right? You verified that every single ledger was perfectly clean." I pull a second folder from the depths of my briefcase. This one is noticeably thinner bound in a stark black cover without any corporate logos. It contains only the most devastating, highly concentrated financial data. I place it flat on the mahogany wood and slide it directly across the length of the table. It glides perfectly, stopping right at the edge of the table, perfectly aligned with Trevor's white-knuckled hands. Trevor looks down at the black folder. He does not touch it. A tiny, invisible tremor begins to form in his right hand. "Trevor," I say, leaning forward just an inch to ensure he hears every single syllable. You used Calvin's commercial real estate portfolio as collateral to cover your catastrophic losses in an offshore crypto scheme. The entire room seems to drop 10 degrees in temperature. Calvin whips his head around to stare at his son-in-law, his eyes wide with a sudden, fresh wave of horror. Trevor's aggressive posture falters. The rigid line of his shoulders collapses. I know exactly what you did. I continue, my voice steady and relentless, detailing the absolute mechanics of his ruin. You thought you were a genius. You thought you could bypass traditional market regulations and double your personal net worth in unregulated, decentralized offshore exchanges. But the market collapsed, and your positions were liquidated. You received a massive margin call. Instead of admitting your failure, you forged Calvin's digital authorization protocols. You used his pristine properties as blind leverage to secure a short-term bridge loan to cover your tracks. You gambled away the family legacy on a digital coin that currently holds zero value. Trevor opens his mouth to speak, but no sound emerges. He looks like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant, wealthy finance manager is completely gone, replaced by a terrified man staring directly into the abyss of federal prison. You might be wondering how a lowly charity case managed to uncover such a highly sophisticated, encrypted offshore transaction, I say, offering him a cold, deeply satisfying smile. I know this because my firm Apex Auditing was contracted directly by the Securities and Exchange Commission to trace the missing funds from that exact collapsed crypto exchange. The acronym drops into the room with the weight of an anvil. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, the ultimate boogeyman for corrupt wealth managers. Trevor's smug face drains of all color. He turns the exact same sickly shade of ash gray that Calvin currently wears. He staggers backward, bumping into the wall behind him, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knows there is no talking his way out of a federal forensic audit. He knows I have his digital footprint, his IP addresses, and his forged authorization signatures, all verified by a government-contracted agency. Vanessa, who has spent this entire confrontation looking mildly annoyed, finally registers that the ground beneath her feet has just completely vanished. Her golden child bubble is violently pierced. The reality of her situation breaks through her arrogant complacency. She drops her hand from her designer pearls, her mouth falling open in genuine confusion. She looks at her husband, the man who funds her luxury shopping sprees, her pristine suburban house, and her entire elite social standing. Trevor, what is she talking about? Vanessa demands, her voice cracking with sudden panic. Tell her she is crazy. Tell her she is making this up. Our accounts are perfect. Trevor cannot even look at his wife. He stares at the black folder on the table as if it is a loaded gun. He is paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming realization that his entire life is over. His career, his marriage, his freedom, all obliterated by the sister-in-law he thought was a joke. I do not wait for him to find his voice. I answer for him, locking my eyes onto my sister. He means your accounts are not pristine, Vanessa, I say, my tone absolutely devoid of sympathy. They are currently frozen by federal investigators. The silence that follows my declaration is absolute. It is the kind of quiet that only exists in a vacuum right before a massive explosion. Vivian stares at the gold-embossed logo of Apex Financial Auditing on the red folder as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike her across the throat. Her mouth works wordlessly, but no sound comes out. Calvin looks physically ill. He slumps backward, his shoulders caving inward as the expensive leather of his chair groans under his sudden dead weight. He knows exactly what it means to have your debt bought out by a hostile entity. It means I hold the keys to his entire kingdom. I have the power to foreclose, to liquidate, to strip him of the carefully constructed illusion of wealth he has spent a lifetime curating. Before Calvin can muster a single word of defense, the illusion of control shatters from the opposite side of the table. Trevor pushes his chair back so violently, it tips over and crashes against the hardwood floor. He slams both of his hands flat onto the polished mahogany table, rattling the champagne flutes and sending a rogue drop of liquor spilling over the rim. Trevor has always been a man who firmly believes his loud voice, his aggressive posture, and his expensive tailored suits make him the smartest person in any room. He leans forward, his face flushed with sudden aggressive indignation, his eyes narrowing into a glare designed to intimidate. "Listen here, you ungrateful charity case!" Trevor snarls, his voice echoing harshly off the wood-paneled walls. "I personally audited Calvin's accounts. They are pristine. You are holding fake documents to extort the family that pulled you out of the foster system." He points a rigid finger directly at my face, utterly convinced of his own untouchable superiority. The sheer venom in his voice is designed to put me back in my place, to remind me that in his eyes, I am nothing more than a stray dog they allowed into their home out of the goodness of their hearts. Charity case. The phrase hangs in the stale air of the conference room. It is a phrase Trevor loves to use. Hearing it now instantly transports me back to a Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago. We were sitting around their massive dining table, groaning under the weight of crystal glasses and silver platters. Trevor had just secured his position at a top-tier wealth management firm, and the entire family was treating him like royalty. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift at my entry-level accounting job and was exhausted. Trevor had looked at me down his nose, swirling his expensive wine. He smiled a cruel, mocking smile and told the entire table that Maya should be the one serving the food tonight. He loudly joked that I did not exactly have the real pedigree to participate in their high-level investment conversations. Calvin and Vivian had laughed uproariously at his joke. Vanessa had simply taken a delicate sip of her wine, not even bothering to look in my direction. I had stayed completely silent that night. I had swallowed the burning humiliation, cleared their dirty plates, and retreated to my tiny studio apartment. I spent that entire Thanksgiving night studying federal tax codes and forensic accounting methodologies until my vision blurred. I stayed silent back then because I was still building my armor. I was still sharpening my claws. I needed them to believe I was weak and defeated so they would never see me coming. Today, I do not stay silent. Today, I do not swallow a single drop of their disrespect. I look at Trevor, keeping my expression completely devoid of emotion. I do not raise my voice. I do not match his aggressive posturing. I simply reach back into my sleek leather briefcase. "You personally audited his accounts, Trevor," I say, my voice slicing through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "Is that right? You verified that every single ledger was perfectly clean." I pull a second folder from the depths of my briefcase. This one is noticeably thinner, bound in a stark black cover without any corporate logos. It contains only the most devastating, highly concentrated financial data. I place it flat on the mahogany wood and slide it directly across the length of the table. It glides perfectly, stopping right at the edge of the table, perfectly aligned with Trevor's white-knuckled hands. Trevor looks down at the black folder. He does not touch it. A tiny, invisible tremor begins to form in his right hand. "Trevor," I say, leaning forward just an inch to ensure he hears every single syllable. "You used Calvin's commercial real estate portfolio as collateral to cover your catastrophic losses in an offshore crypto scheme." The entire room seems to drop 10 degrees in temperature. Calvin whips his head around to stare at his son-in-law, his eyes wide with a sudden fresh wave of horror. Trevor's aggressive posture falters. The rigid line of his shoulders collapses. "I know exactly what you did." I continue, my voice steady and relentless, detailing the absolute mechanics of his ruin. "You thought you were a genius. You thought you could bypass traditional market regulations and double your personal net worth in unregulated, decentralized offshore exchanges. But the market collapsed and your positions were liquidated. You received a massive margin call. Instead of admitting your failure, you forged Calvin's digital authorization protocols. You used his pristine properties as blind leverage to secure a short-term bridge loan to cover your tracks. You gambled away the family legacy on a digital coin that currently holds zero value." Trevor opens his mouth to speak, but no sound emerges. He looks like a fish suffocating on dry land. The arrogant, wealthy finance manager is completely gone, replaced by a terrified man staring directly into the abyss of federal prison. You might be wondering how a lowly charity case managed to uncover such a highly sophisticated encrypted offshore transaction, I say, offering him a cold, deeply satisfying smile. I know this because my firm Apex Auditing was contracted directly by the Securities and Exchange Commission to trace the missing funds from that exact collapsed crypto exchange. The acronym drops into the room with the weight of an anvil. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. The ultimate boogeyman for corrupt wealth managers. Trevor's smug face drains of all color. He turns the exact same sickly shade of ash gray that Calvin currently wears. He staggers backward, bumping into the wall behind him, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knows there is no talking his way out of a federal forensic audit. He knows I have his digital footprint, his IP addresses, and his forged authorization signatures all verified by a government-contracted agency. Vanessa, who has spent this entire confrontation looking mildly annoyed, finally registers that the ground beneath her feet has just completely vanished. Her golden child bubble is violently pierced. The reality of her situation breaks through her arrogant complacency. She drops her hand from her designer pearls, her mouth falling open in genuine confusion. She looks at her husband, the man who funds her luxury shopping sprees, her pristine suburban house, and her entire elite social standing. Trevor, what is she talking about? Vanessa demands, her voice cracking with sudden panic. Tell her she is crazy. Tell her she is making this up. Our accounts are perfect. Trevor cannot even look at his wife. He stares at the black folder on the table as if it is a loaded gun. He is paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming realization that his entire life is over. His career, his marriage, his freedom, all obliterated by the sister-in-law he thought was a joke. I do not wait for him to find his voice. I answer for him, locking my eyes onto my sister. He means your accounts are not pristine, Vanessa? I say, my tone absolutely devoid of sympathy. They are currently frozen by federal investigators. Vanessa stares at me for exactly 2 seconds before the reality of my words breaches her carefully constructed reality. She whips her head toward her husband. Trevor is already moving. He rips his phone out of his tailored pocket with hands that are visibly shaking. He taps the screen, frantically navigating to his elite banking application. His thumb jabs at the biometric scanner. The screen flashes white, then bright red. A bold notification appears denying him access. Account frozen. Please contact your federal regulatory compliance officer. Trevor drops the phone. It hits the polished mahogany table with a sharp clatter, sliding until it bumps against Mr. Sterling's coffee mug. Trevor lets out a sound that is half gasp, half whimper. He grabs his own hair, ruining his expensive styling, his breathing ragged and shallow. Vanessa looks at the red screen and then at her husband. Her face contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She lunges at him. She slaps her palms hard against his chest, striking the lapels of his bespoke suit. "What did you do, Trevor?" She screams, her voice shattering the quiet dignity of the law office. "What did you do to my money? Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me my accounts are fine." Trevor does not answer her. He cannot even look her in the eye. He just shrinks backward, retreating from her assault, a completely broken man. He knows he is facing decades in federal prison, and he knows his wife will not wait a single day for him. When Trevor refuses to speak, Vanessa spins around to face me. Her perfectly curled hair is suddenly disheveled. The veins in her neck bulge against her string of designer pearls. She cannot accept that her husband is a criminal, so she falls back on the only coping mechanism she has ever known. She blames me. "You did this," she shrieks, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You set him up. You have always been obsessed with ruining my life because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of my perfect marriage and my wealthy lifestyle. You cannot stand that I have everything you will never have." She is hyperventilating now, pacing the length of the table, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. "You are just as bitter now as you were in high school," she yells. "Just like you were jealous when I took your spot on the varsity squad. You always thought you were better than me just because you practiced harder. But you were nothing. I was the star." Her words hang in the air, pulling me right back to a rainy Tuesday afternoon during my junior year. I had trained for 8 months running drills until my lungs burned, earning the starting position on the varsity track team purely through sweat and dedication. Vanessa had quit the team 2 weeks into the season because she hated sweating. But when the state championships approached and college scouts were confirmed to attend, Vivian decided Vanessa needed an athletic scholarship to round out her mediocre academic profile. Vivian marched into the athletic director's office and wrote a massive check to the booster club. The very next day, the coach benched me citing an imaginary attitude problem and handed my starting spot directly to Vanessa. I watched from the bleachers as she jogged around the track in a pristine uniform while Vivian clapped from the front row. They stole my achievement and repackaged it as Vanessa's birthright. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to. The truth is much louder than her screaming. I was not jealous, Vanessa. I say, my voice dropping to a low, steady cadence that forces everyone in the room to listen. I was not jealous of you jogging around a track. I was simply too busy working 3 minimum wage jobs to care about your manufactured popularity. I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands on the cool mahogany surface. I looked directly at Vivian, who is trying to shrink into the upholstery of her chair. Do you want to know why I had to work those 3 jobs, Vanessa? I asked, never breaking eye contact with our mother. It was not to build character. It was because Vivian and Calvin stole the $100,000 adoption subsidy the state provided for my care. They emptied the entire trust account the state set up to guarantee my education and basic living expenses. Vanessa stops pacing. She frowns, her anger momentarily derailed by confusion. What are you talking about? She demands. Mom and Dad never took anything. They are wealthy. They do not need state money. I let out a short, dry laugh. They needed it more than you can possibly imagine. They took that $100,000 right before your graduation. They drained every single penny meant for my college tuition, my medical care, and my future just to pay for your lavish destination wedding in the Bahamas. The silence that follows is so absolute it feels suffocating. I watch the realization hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She remembers the ice sculptures carved to look like swans. She remembers the imported orchids flown in from Thailand. She remembers the open bar and the 5-star resort accommodations for 200 guests. She thought her parents were simply expressing their boundless love and wealth. She never realized her fairy tale wedding was entirely funded by the stolen financial lifeline of a foster child. Vivian gasps a sharp, desperate intake of air. She covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with undisguised terror. Her deepest, darkest secret is out. Defrauding a state adoption agency is not just a moral failing. It is a severe federal crime carrying mandatory minimum sentencing. The statute of limitations on fraud involving a minor does not expire the way she thought it did. She knows that as an auditor, I already have the bank routing numbers, the forged signature documents, and the exact dates the funds were transferred to the wedding planners. Mr. Sterling. The lawyer drops his pen. It clatters against his notepad. He stares at Calvin and Vivian with an expression of profound professional disgust. He is bound by attorney-client privilege for the estate, but he is not shielded from federal fraud investigations. He visibly edges his chair away from Calvin, wanting absolutely no proximity to the radioactive bomb I have just dropped in his conference room. Vivian begins to hyperventilate. Calvin, do something, she wheezes, clutching his arm. Tell her she is lying. Tell Mr. Sterling she fabricated those bank records. We did not steal anything. We provided a roof over her head. That money was compensation for dealing with her. She is practically confessing to the crime in her panic, justifying the theft as a parental salary. Calvin rips his arm away from her grasp. He realizes that trying to defend the real estate leverage and the adoption fraud simultaneously is a losing battle. He needs a lifeline. He needs immediate liquid capital to hire a defense team to fight the SEC investigation into Trevor and to somehow silence me before I hand this dossier to the authorities. Calvin regains his footing, pushing himself up from his chair. He slams his fist down hard on the mahogany table, rattling the remaining champagne flutes. His face is purple with a mix of fury and sheer desperation. Enough, Calvin roars, his voice booming through the room. I will not sit here and be interrogated by an ungrateful orphan who thinks she can march in here and dictate the terms of my family. He turns his blazing eyes toward Mr. Sterling, completely ignoring the wreckage of his son-in-law and the hyperventilating panic of his wife. He points a demanding finger at the lawyer. Even if the real estate is temporarily tied up, the cash trust is mine. Calvin declares, his chest heaving as he claims his final victory. Grandpa named me the sole executor of his liquid assets. Read the rest of the will, Sterling. Transfer the cash accounts to my name right now. Mr. Sterling clears his throat, adjusting his glasses as he stares at the heavily stamped parchment of Grandpa Jeremiah's final amendment. The veteran lawyer looks deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Calvin's flushed, triumphant face and my completely neutral expression. He takes a slow, measured breath, attempting to maintain the strict professional decorum of his mahogany-lined conference room. He knows the words he is about to read will detonate like a bomb. Actually, Calvin, Mr. Sterling says, his voice wavering slightly under the immense pressure of the room. Jeremiah made an amendment regarding the executor of the cash trust 3 weeks before he passed. Calvin freezes, his hand suspended over the table. The smug, victorious smile instantly vanishes from his lips, replaced by a dark, stormy confusion. What do you mean, an amendment? He demands, his tone dropping into a dangerous, predatory growl. I saw the draft of that will 6 months ago. My father explicitly named me as the sole executor of his entire liquid fortune. It is my money. Vivian steps forward, her face contorted in an ugly mask of entitlement. Her heavy diamond rings clatter against the wood as she slams her hands down. What amendment? Vivian shrieks, her voice hitting an octave so shrill it makes my ears ring. You listen to me, Sterling. We pay your exorbitant retainer. We have kept this mediocre law firm afloat with our family business for decades. If you are trying to tell us that you allowed a senile, dying old man to change his will at the last minute because he was manipulated by some ungrateful charity case, I will personally see to it that you are disbarred. I will sue this firm for gross malpractice and professional negligence. I will drag your name through the mud until you cannot even practice law in traffic court. We demand access to our funds right now. Listening to Vivian threaten a respected attorney with absolute destruction sends a wave of profound satisfaction rushing through my veins. Her words perfectly echo the exact tactics she used during my childhood. I vividly remember sitting in a sterile social worker's office when I was 14 years old, with a bruised cheek and a fractured wrist from one of Calvin's violent outbursts. Vivian had marched into that office, radiating false concern and weaponized charm. She had looked the social worker right in the eye and spun a masterful lie, claiming I had injured myself during a hysterical manic episode. She threatened to sue the state agency for harassment if they ever questioned her parenting again. The social worker had backed down, intimidated by her wealth and her threats. Vivian has spent her entire life using her checkbook as a bludgeon to silence anyone who dared to question her authority. But Mr. Sterling does not back down. He takes a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he fully steps into his legal authority. Mrs. Sterling, you can threaten me with all the malpractice suits you desire, he replies, his voice finally steadying. But it will not change the legal reality of the situation. Jeremiah did not change his will due to manipulation, and he certainly was not suffering from diminished capacity. He brought 2 independent medical professionals with him. He sat in this very room and passed a comprehensive, rigorous cognitive and psychological evaluation right in front of a court-appointed witness. He anticipated that you would try to challenge his mental state, Vivian. He legally bulletproofed his own estate. Vivian's mouth falls open in stunned silence. The realization that Grandpa Jeremiah had seen right through her greed and preemptively blocked her legal strategies leaves her entirely speechless. Mr. Sterling looks down at the paper and begins to read the exact legally binding text of Grandpa Jeremiah's final amendment. Regarding the entirety of my liquid capital totaling exactly $45 million, currently held in the primary family trust, Mr. Sterling reads, his voice projecting clearly. I hereby revoke all previous executive assignments. Full executive power over the $45 million liquid trust is transferred exclusively to the individual who currently holds the legal deed to the ancestral property Jeremiah's original barbershop. For a fraction of a second, the room remains suspended in a state of absolute paralysis. I watch Vivian closely, waiting for the crushing weight of $45 million slipping through her fingers to finally bring her to her knees. I expect tears. I expect rage. Instead, the silence is shattered by a sound that completely defies logic. Vivian laughs. It is not a chuckle or a nervous giggle. It is a high, hysterical screech of pure, unadulterated relief. She throws her head back and the sound bounces off the glass conference room walls, grating and abrasive. She actually claps her manicured hands together, turning toward her husband with her eyes wide with a frantic, manic joy. "Well, that is absolutely perfect," Vivian shrieks, her chest heaving as she catches her breath. "Calvin, tell her. Tell this arrogant little girl exactly why her grand master plan just went up in smoke." I shift my gaze to Calvin. The ash-gray pallor that had consumed his face only moments ago is rapidly fading. The blood rushes back into his cheeks, restoring his flush of arrogant superiority. He rolls his shoulders back, shedding the momentary terror of my forensic ambush, like a snake shedding dead skin. He leans heavily against the conference table, resting his weight on his knuckles as he stares me down. The panic has evaporated, leaving behind the deeply entrenched narcissism of a man who firmly believes the rules do not apply to him. "You really thought you had me." "Maya," Calvin says, his voice dripping with condescension. "You thought you could walk in here, throw some SEC documents on the table, and dictate the terms of my father's estate. You thought you were so incredibly clever, but you missed one massive glaring detail. I secretly sold that old, dilapidated barbershop to a commercial developer 5 years ago." He smiles, a wide, predatory grin revealing his perfectly capped teeth. Grandpa had absolutely no idea. The sheer callousness of his admission hits the air like a physical blow. He did not just sell a building. He sold the physical manifestation of his father's life work, and he did it in the dark. Hearing his boastful confession instantly transports me back to a rainy Thursday afternoon 5 years ago. The memory is so vivid, I can almost smell the stale coffee and the scent of the rain hitting the pavement outside Grandpa Jeremiah's small apartment. I remember walking into his living room and finding him sitting heavily in his worn armchair. He was a proud man, a pillar of the community, who stood tall through decades of hardship. But that day, his shoulders were completely bowed. He was clutching a stack of legal documents in his trembling hands. He was crying. It was the first and only time I had ever seen a tear fall from his eyes. He looked up at me, his voice completely broken, and told me the city was seizing his shop. He told me he had failed. Calvin had been standing right there in the living room wearing a bespoke charcoal suit and checking his luxury watch. He placed a heavy, patronizing hand on his father's shoulder, playing the role of the concerned son. Calvin had looked at me with an expression of manufactured pity and loudly blamed Grandpa's old age. He claimed Jeremiah's cognitive decline had caused him to forget to pay the property taxes for over 4 years. He told Grandpa the city had foreclosed and the building was gone. He fed his own father a meticulously crafted lie, designed to break his spirit and force him into a state of helpless dependency. I had sat at the kitchen table that night, furiously reviewing the blurry photocopies of the tax notices Calvin had provided. My instincts as a young auditor screamed that the math did not align, that the municipal timelines were completely fabricated. But I lacked the legal authority, the resources, and the raw power to expose the fraud. I had to watch Grandpa Jeremiah carry the heavy burden of that manufactured shame until the day he died. He went to his grave believing he had squandered his own legacy. Now standing in this pristine conference room, the cold, focused rage that has fueled my entire career solidifies into an unbreakable diamond. Calvin did not just steal a building, he stole his father's dignity just to line his own pockets. The developer wanted that entire city block to construct a luxury high-rise condominium complex. Calvin continues completely oblivious to the lethal calculations running through my mind. They paid me a massive premium under the table to secure the anchor property. I forged the proxy documents, transferred the deed, and took the cash. By the time my father realized the shop was boarded up, the demolition notices were already pasted on the front door. Mr. Sterling shifts uncomfortably in his leather chair, clearly distressed by this casual admission of severe elder fraud and document forgery. But Calvin ignores the lawyer completely, focused entirely on my face, desperate to see me admit defeat. But that developer went bankrupt, Calvin says, his voice rising in triumphant volume. That is the beauty of it, Maya. He over-leveraged his entire firm trying to secure the surrounding lots. The market shifted, the funding dried up, and his commercial firm went completely under before they could even move a single bulldozer onto the property. Vanessa, who has been sitting in stunned silence since Trevor's federal crimes were exposed, finally manages a weak, uncertain smile. She looks at her father desperately, needing him to pull a victory out of this absolute wreckage. "What does that mean, Dad?" she asks, her voice trembling slightly. "What happens to the $45 million? "It means the property is trapped in legal purgatory," Calvin answers proudly, turning to address his daughter. "When the developer dissolved, the assets were frozen. The property is tied up in the city's foreclosure limbo. It is an administrative nightmare buried under mountains of municipal red tape and unpaid commercial liens." Calvin turns his attention back to me, his eyes flashing with aggressive certainty. "Because the developer went bankrupt, and the city has not processed the final liquidation, no one holds the deed. The ownership is essentially void. And according to standard probate law, when an impossible condition is written into a will, and the specified asset cannot be legally claimed, the executor status defaults to the next of kin, me." He slams his hand flat on the table again, sealing his argument. "That means the condition is nullified. The $45 million liquid trust bypasses the barbershop requirement entirely and reverts directly to me. I win, Maya. You played a good game, but you are still just an amateur." Mr. Sterling furiously flips through his thick legal reference books, checking the probate statutes Calvin just cited. The lawyer's face falls. He looks up at me, his expression grim and apologetic, acknowledging that Calvin's twisted legal logic is technically sound under standard municipal default rules. Vivian lets out another sharp screech of laughter, tossing her head back. She reaches out and grabs Calvin's arm, practically vibrating with renewed greed. "I knew it!" She gloats, her eyes darting toward me with venomous delight. "I knew you could not outsmart us. We are leaving here today with $45 million in cash, and you are going back to whatever miserable little life you crawled out of." Trevor, who is still pressed against the far wall like a cornered rat, lets out a shaky breath of relief. He realizes Calvin's cash windfall is his only chance to fight the SEC investigation. They all look at me, expecting me to pack up my briefcase, expecting me to lower my head and walk out of the mahogany doors in total defeat. They think the game is over. I do not move. I do not flinch. I let their arrogant celebration fill the room, letting them taste the absolute peak of their false victory. I let the silence stretch out for exactly 10 seconds. Then I slowly reach into my briefcase for the third and final time. "You really should keep up with municipal auctions, Calvin." The silence that follows Calvin's bold declaration is heavy, thick with the stench of his unearned arrogance. He stands there, chest puffed out, breathing heavily through his nose, waiting for the universe to bend to his will, as it always has. He genuinely believes he has found the ultimate loophole. He believes that because he orchestrated a fraudulent under-the-table sale of his own father's beloved barbershop 5 years ago, the universe will reward him with $45 million. He is so blinded by his own narcissism that he cannot comprehend the meticulous, suffocating web I have spent the last 5 years spinning around him. I do not break my gaze. I do not flinch at his raised voice or his aggressive posturing. Instead, I slowly reach into my sleek leather briefcase for the third and final time. My fingers brush against the thick, textured parchment waiting patiently at the very bottom. I pull out a heavy gold-embossed legal document and place it flat on the mahogany table. I press my manicured index finger against the bottom edge of the paper and slide it across the smooth wood. It glides with a quiet, terrifying grace, stopping exactly between Calvin's clenched fists and Mr. Sterling's coffee mug. "You really should keep up with municipal auctions, Calvin," I state softly, my voice perfectly level, ringing with absolute finality. Calvin stares at the document, his brow furrowing, as a deep primal unease begins to fracture his confident smirk. The developer did go bankrupt. I explained, delivering the words like slow, deliberate physical strikes. His assets were seized by the city and tied up in administrative limbo, just as you so proudly claimed. But they did not stay there forever. The commercial lots were finally processed, cleared of their zoning disputes, and auctioned off to the highest bidder last Tuesday. I watched the remaining color drain from Calvin's face. The flush of arrogant superiority rapidly fades, replaced by a sickly, chalky white. I bought the barber shop, I say, leaning forward just a fraction of an inch. In cash. I took the legitimate salary I earned from my auditing firm. I paid the back taxes you deliberately ignored. I cleared the municipal liens you allowed to accumulate, and I restored the property to its rightful state. Calvin lets out a guttural, choking sound of sheer disbelief. He practically throws himself forward, his chest slamming hard against the edge of the conference table as he snatches the document. His hands are trembling so violently that the thick parchment rattles loudly in his grip. His eyes dart back and forth across the page, scanning the dense legal text with a frantic, desperate energy. He is searching for a flaw. He is hunting for a fake signature, an expired notary stamp, a missing municipal seal, a misspelled name, anything that can prove this is just an elaborate bluff. He reads the buyer's name. He reads the property description. He reads the official raised seal of the city planning and zoning office. He flips the page over, looking for a technicality that might save his life. He finds absolutely nothing. The document is flawless. Mr. Sterling leans over, adjusting his reading glasses to inspect the deed in Calvin's shaking hands. The veteran estate lawyer lets out a heavy, slow breath, nodding his head in profound professional confirmation. The deed is completely legitimate. The chain of custody is unbroken. The ancestral property has officially been reclaimed. I am the sole owner of Grandpa's legacy, I state softly, making sure the words echo in the dead silence of the room. I hold the legal deed to the original barber shop, which makes me, according to the unalterable amendment you just demanded, to hear the sole executor and beneficiary of the $45 million liquid trust. The silence returns, but this time it is a suffocating, crushing weight. Calvin drops the deed. It flutters onto the table, landing next to the spilled champagne. He stares at the thick parchment, as if the paper itself has physically burned his skin. He sold his father's dignity and life's work for a quick payout, completely blind to the fact that his greed would eventually cost him an empire. He traded $45 million for a fraction of its worth, because he thought he was smarter than a humble man who spent his life cutting hair. Vivian makes a sound like a wounded animal. The hysterical manic joy from just moments ago has completely vanished, replaced by a hollow, gaping despair. She looks at Calvin, her eyes wide and begging for him to perform some kind of miracle to pull a legal trick out of thin air and save their lavish lifestyle. But Calvin has nothing left. He is empty. The bank accounts are frozen, the commercial real estate is heavily leveraged and owned by my firm, and the massive liquid cash trust has legally and permanently bypassed him. Across the room, the final pillar of their crumbling dynasty breaks away. Trevor is still standing frozen against the far wall, pressing his back into the expensive wallpaper. His bespoke suit suddenly looks too big for him, hanging off his collapsing shoulders. Throughout this entire confrontation, Trevor has been frantically calculating his odds of survival. He had banked absolutely everything on Calvin securing that $45 million. He desperately needed that massive cash injection to hire elite corporate defense attorneys to bury the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation in endless retaliatory litigation, and to somehow save himself from the catastrophic federal consequences of his offshore crypto fraud. But as Trevor looks at the flawless legal deed resting on the table, the harsh mathematical reality of his situation clicks firmly into place. Calvin has no money. Vivian has no power. Vanessa is entirely dependent on a generational wealth that no longer exists. His wife's family is completely, unequivocally broke. There is no bailout coming. There is no financial parachute waiting to catch him. He is facing federal charges, complete asset seizure, and decades in a federal penitentiary, and the people he thought would protect him cannot even protect themselves. Trevor makes a deeply calculated, entirely selfish decision. He realizes that if he stays in this room, he goes down with the sinking ship. He needs to drain whatever personal offshore accounts he has left and disappear before the federal agents knock on his front door. He does not say a word. He does not offer a single syllable of comfort or solidarity to his wife. He simply straightens his tie with shaking hands, picks up his sleek leather briefcase from the floor, and walks quietly toward the heavy oak doors of the conference room. Vanessa turns her head, her tear-streaked face registering his sudden movement. Her eyes widen in horror as she processes what he is doing. "Trevor!" she calls out, her voice cracking with sheer unfiltered panic. "Trevor, where are you going? Do not leave me here. You cannot leave me with them." Trevor does not even look back. He does not break his stride. He reaches the heavy oak doors, pushes the brass handle down, and walks out of the room, letting the heavy door click firmly shut behind him. The abandonment is total and absolute. The man who swore to protect her, the elite wealth manager who funded her entire arrogant identity, has just walked away to save his own skin, leaving her entirely alone in the wreckage of her family's shattered empire. Vanessa lets out a piercing, gut-wrenching scream. Her knees buckle beneath her. She collapses onto the hardwood floor, her designer dress pooling awkwardly around her as she buries her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child, the varsity star, the woman who spent her entire life looking down on everyone else from her manufactured pedestal, is now reduced to a weeping, discarded heap on the floor, stripped of her husband, her status, and her future. I look down at her feeling absolutely no pity. I feel only the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing out. The debt she owed me for a lifetime of cruelty has just been paid in full, but the confrontation in the conference room is not over. Calvin is still standing over the table. The initial paralyzing shock of the deed has worn off, rapidly replaced by something much darker and far more dangerous. His breathing is heavy, his chest heaving with deep, ragged breaths that sound like a malfunctioning engine. His face contorts, the skin turning a mottled, violent shade of purple. The thick veins in his neck and forehead bulge, pulsing with a toxic, uncontrollable rage. His entire reality has been violently dismantled in the span of 20 minutes. He has lost his properties. He has lost his father's trust. He has lost his son-in-law. He has lost $45 million. And he has lost it all to the one person he viewed as entirely insignificant. He looks at me, his eyes burning with a pure, unadulterated hatred that strips away every last ounce of his civilized, wealthy businessman persona. He is no longer a corporate executive. He is a cornered, desperate animal who has just realized the steel trap has permanently snapped shut around his leg. "You thief!" Calvin roars, his voice tearing from his throat with raw, primal fury. "You set us up! You planned this from the very beginning!" Before Mr. Sterling can reach for his phone to call building security, before Vivian can even scream his name to stop him, Calvin snaps. The remaining shreds of his sanity completely evaporate. He lunges violently across the wide mahogany table. His sudden explosive movement knocks over the remaining champagne flutes. The delicate crystal shatters instantly against the hard wood, sending sharp shards of glass and sticky, expensive liquor flying across the scattered legal documents. He ignores the mess entirely, his body scrambling over the polished surface with terrifying, reckless speed. His arms stretch out, his fingers curled into rigid claws, his heavy hands reaching directly for my throat. Calvin's hands swipe through the empty space where my throat was a fraction of a second ago. He is not a trained fighter, and he possesses absolutely zero tactical discipline. He is simply a spoiled, aging narcissist fueled entirely by blind panic and a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. I do not scream. I do not throw my arms up to block his pathetic attack. I simply take one smooth, calculated step backward. I have spent 22 years memorizing the exact cadence of his rage. I know the precise warning signs, the slight twitch of his jaw, the aggressive shift in his stance, the exact moment his bruised ego overrides his rational brain. I anticipated this physical outburst the moment I placed the deed on the table. His violent momentum carries him recklessly forward. His chest slams hard into the edge of the mahogany table, knocking the wind out of his lungs with a loud grunt. His flailing arms sweep violently across the polished surface. The heavy gold-embossed deed is knocked completely out of the way, fluttering through the air before landing on the floor. His wildly swinging arm catches the remaining champagne flutes, sending them crashing down. The delicate crystal shatters instantly against the hardwood floor, sending sharp, translucent shards and sticky, expensive liquor flying in every direction. He grasps desperately at the empty air, his polished Italian leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the champagne-soaked wood. He looks utterly pathetic. He looks like a monster stripped of its terrifying shadows and exposed to the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of reality. Mr. Sterling scrambles out of his high-backed leather chair, practically falling over his own feet to get away from the table. "Security," he bellows, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "Get security in here right now!" The seasoned estate lawyer hits a discreet panic button mounted under the edge of the conference table, his hands shaking visibly. He has managed high-net-worth estates for decades, but he is completely unequipped to handle a physical brawl involving attempted murder and federal fraud. The threat of security. The sudden jarring realization of physical assault taking place inside a high-end law firm breaks through Vivian's momentary paralysis. She snaps violently back into survival mode. She cannot allow her husband to be seen as a violent aggressor. She cannot allow the carefully constructed narrative of their pristine, wealthy family to slip out of her manicured hands. She immediately launches into a frantic, desperate campaign of psychological warfare, relying on the only weapon she has ever truly mastered. "She forged it!" Vivian screams, pointing a trembling finger at the deed resting on the floor. "That document is completely fake. Maya has always been a liar. She is a pathological liar who has spent her entire life trying to destroy this family." Vivian practically climbs over the arm of her leather chair, her eyes wide and wild, her face flushed with a terrifying manic energy. She looks directly at Mr. Sterling, desperately trying to pull the terrified lawyer into her delusion. "You cannot believe a single word she says." "Sterling." Vivian screeches, her voice echoing painfully in the room. "She probably sabotaged her own car just to frame us. She severed her own brake lines to play the victim. She is a deeply disturbed young woman who belongs in a secure psychiatric ward, not a corporate boardroom. She is trying to steal our hard-earned money because she is mentally ill." I watch her spin this incredibly toxic web, and I am struck by how entirely predictable she is. Gaslighting is her default setting. When the cold, hard facts do not align with her selfish desires, she simply attempts to rewrite reality with sheer volume and aggressive repetition. She expects her status as a wealthy suburban matriarch, wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry, to automatically validate her lies. She genuinely thinks that projecting her own family's lethal sins onto me will somehow magically absolve them of their crimes. She is trying to build a wall of noise to drown out the undeniable truth resting on the floor. Calvin uses the edge of the mahogany table to push himself back up to a standing position. His chest is heaving, his breathing shallow and ragged. His bespoke suit jacket is hopelessly wrinkled and stained with a large dark patch of spilled alcohol. He wipes a shaking hand across his mouth, trying to compose himself, trying desperately to regain the imposing patriarchal stature he relies on to intimidate his subordinates and silence his victims. He glares at me, expecting me to shrink back, expecting me to defend myself against Vivian's outrageous and insulting accusations. He waits for the frantic denial, the emotional outburst, the tearful defense that would finally allow him to label me hysterical and unstable. He wants me to lose my temper so he can regain his control. I give him absolutely nothing. I do not blink. I hold my ground, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor, and stare coldly directly into the eyes of the man who was supposed to be my father. I look at the man who accepted state money to shelter a vulnerable child and instead provided a masterclass in emotional abuse and financial exploitation. I feel no fear, only the icy calm of a predator cornering its prey. "You cut my brake lines, Calvin," I say. my voice ringing with a cold, lethal clarity that slices right through Vivian's continued screeching. The words hang in the air, chilling the room to absolute zero. This is no longer just a dispute over corporate leverage, offshore shell companies, or hidden bank accounts. This is a direct, unflinching accusation of attempted murder. Mr. Sterling stops moving, entirely pressing his back against the wall, as the true gravity of the situation settles over the room. You were perfectly fine with me dying today, so you could steal a dead man's money? I continue my tone, never wavering, locking my gaze onto his panicked eyes. You knew the federal investigators were closing in on Trevor. You knew your commercial real estate portfolio was drowning in toxic, hidden debt. You desperately needed that $45 million liquid trust to save your pathetic, crumbling empire, and you knew I was the only person standing in your way. You crawled under my car in the dark like a coward and severed the hydraulic lines, hoping I would wrap my vehicle around a concrete pillar on the highway. You tried to kill me because you are terrified of being poor. Calvin stares at me for a long, heavy moment. The blind adrenaline that had fueled his physical lunge slowly begins to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating survival instinct. He takes a deep breath and looks around the room. He sees Mr. Sterling backed into a corner, looking absolutely horrified, but taking no physical action. He sees his wife standing fiercely by his side, violently nodding in agreement with her own fabricated reality. He realizes that there are no police officers standing behind me. There are no handcuffs being presented. There is no immediate physical threat to his freedom. There is only a young woman making a very serious accusation inside a private, legally privileged office. The monstrous arrogance that defines his entire existence comes rushing back and flooding his veins with false bravado. He actually smiles. It is a slow, curling sneer that drips with supreme malice and untouchable superiority. He casually reaches down and straightens his ruined suit jacket, brushing a speck of dust off his lapel, as if the violent physical assault from 30 seconds ago never even happened. You have no proof I was anywhere near your car, Calvin sneers, his voice returning to its normal condescending boom, projecting complete authority. You have a wild imagination, Maya, but imagination does not hold up in a court of law. It is your word against a respected businessman. I am a pillar of this community. I sit on the board of the country club. I employ hundreds of people in this city. I pay millions in local taxes. You are nothing but a disgruntled foster kid throwing a desperate, unhinged tantrum because you are jealous of your betters. No one will ever believe you over me. He steps away from the table, crossing his arms over his chest, exuding a false, untouchable confidence. He firmly believes his wealth, his social connections, and his status will forever shield him from any real consequences. He thinks he has successfully navigated the trap. He thinks he has won the psychological standoff by simply refusing to admit defeat. Just as he finishes his sentence, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swing wide open. The heavy oak doors of the conference room do not just swing open, they are thrust apart with a violent kinetic force that sends the solid brass handles crashing hard into the drywall. The sound is like a gunshot detonating in the confined space, shattering the chaotic tension. Calvin freezes. His hands are mere inches from my neck, his fingers curled into rigid hooks, his knuckles white with homicidal intent. The sudden explosive noise shatters his violent tunnel vision. He jerks his head toward the entrance, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He is breathing so hard that a drop of sweat rolls off his forehead and lands on the scattered shards of champagne glass. He looks like a rabid dog interrupted mid-bite. Footsteps echo against the polished marble of the hallway outside. They are slow, deliberate, and heavy, carrying the unmistakable cadence of absolute authority. A man steps across the threshold and into the conference room. He brings an immediate, terrifyingly calm presence with him, instantly sucking all the oxygen out of the space. He is wearing an immaculate charcoal gray tailored Tom Ford suit. The cut of the fabric is flawless, draping over his broad shoulders with a crisp, predatory elegance. A silk pocket square rests perfectly in his breast pocket. A vintage Patek Philippe watch catches the fluorescent light from his left wrist. His posture is rigid, his spine straight, his chin held high. He radiates a quiet, lethal power that immediately dwarfs Calvin's manufactured suburban bravado. The man surveys the room. He looks at the overturned chairs, the spilled liquor, the shattered crystal, and finally his eyes lock onto Calvin, who is still awkwardly sprawled over the mahogany table with his hands suspended in the air. Vivian stares at the man standing in the doorway. Her eyes dart from his polished Italian leather shoes to his sharp jawline to his meticulously groomed silver hair. The gears in her mind grind together desperately, trying to categorize him to figure out which elite country club or corporate board he belongs to. It takes her 1 full second to recognize the facial structure. It takes her 2 seconds to recognize the deep-set piercing blue eyes. It takes her 3 full seconds to strip away the bespoke suit, the expensive watch, and the commanding posture in her mind and replace it with a tattered army surplus coat and a face smeared with street dirt. Vivian lets out a sound that is entirely inhuman. It is a wet, suffocating gasp, as if her lungs have just collapsed. She takes a stumbling step backward, bumping into the credenza. Silas, she whispers, her voice trembling with absolute, unadulterated horror. The homeless guy from the shop. The name drops into the room like a lead weight. Calvin slowly pulls his arms back from across the table, standing up straight as his brain short-circuits. He stares at the man in the Tom Ford suit, utterly unable to reconcile the imposing titan standing before him with the wretched, shuffling vagrant he remembers. Seeing the sheer terror on Vivian's face transports me instantly back to a freezing January morning 10 years ago. It was the week before my high school midterms, and I had walked to Grandpa Jeremiah's barber shop to help him sweep the floors. I remember arriving just as Vivian pulled her massive luxury SUV up to the curb, illegally parking across the crosswalk. She had stepped out wrapped in a floor-length mink coat, clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if the very air of the neighborhood might infect her. Silas had been standing on the sidewalk right outside the shop's glass door. Back then, Silas wore a filthy, oversized coat, fingerless wool gloves, and a thick, overgrown beard that obscured half his face. He was holding a worn broom, sweeping the snow and salt off the concrete stoop. Vivian had completely lost her mind. She shrieked, demanding to know why Grandpa Jeremiah allowed a filthy vagrant to loiter in front of family property. Calvin had stepped out of the driver's side of the SUV, marching directly up to Silas. Calvin did not even treat him like a human being. He treated him like a piece of garbage blocking his path. Calvin had cursed at him, snatched the broom out of his hands, and violently kicked Silas's metal dustpan directly into the freezing gutter, spilling wet trash all over the road. Calvin threatened to call the police and have him arrested for trespassing if he ever caught him begging near the shop again. Silas had not said a single word. He had simply bowed his head, pulled his tattered collar up around his ears, and shuffled away into the freezing rain, playing the part of the broken, defeated street beggar perfectly. Grandpa Jeremiah had watched the entire scene from the window, his jaw clenched tight, but he had stayed silent, keeping the ultimate secret. Vivian had spent the next decade referring to Silas as the human trash that infested her father-in-law's pathetic life. She used him as the ultimate punchline at her dinner parties, a cautionary tale of what happens when you do not possess the supreme intellect and ruthless drive of the Calvin Sterling legacy. Now the human trash is standing in a suit that costs more than Vivian's entire jewelry collection, looking at her as if she is a diseased insect. I do not wait for Calvin to recover his voice. I step smoothly away from the edge of the table, putting distance between myself and Calvin's trembling fists. I walk across the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood, and take my place directly beside Silas. We stand shoulder to shoulder, a united front against the crumbling remnants of my abusive family. Silas was not just a floor sweeper, Vivian, I state, my voice cutting through her terrified silence with surgical precision. He was Grandpa Jeremiah's silent business partner for 30 years. Calvin's jaw physically drops. His eyes bulge as he stares at Silas and then at me, his mind violently rejecting the information. What he stammers, his voice cracking. What are you talking about? My father owned that shop. My father was a barber. He did not have a partner. You never asked Calvin. Silas finally speaks. His voice is a deep, resonant rumble that seems to vibrate through the very floorboards. It possesses none of the gravelly weakness he faked for all those years on the street. It is the voice of a man who is entirely accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. You never bothered to look past the surface of anything in your entire life, Silas continues, taking one slow, measured step into the room. You looked at Jeremiah and saw a simple old man you could manipulate. You looked at me and saw a convenient target for your pathetic superiority complex. You looked at Maya and saw a disposable tax write-off. You were so blinded by your own desperate need to feel important that you never realized Jeremiah and I bought up the commercial rights to that entire block in 1992. Mr. Sterling, the estate lawyer, lets out a low whistle of shock, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his brow again. He is witnessing the greatest long con in corporate history unfold right in his own office. Jeremiah was the face of the operation, Silas explains, keeping his piercing blue eyes locked onto Calvin. I provided the initial capital and managed the forensic accounting. We built a shadow portfolio right under your nose. When you came crying to him for loans to fund your fake luxury lifestyle, we used the profits from our commercial leases to bail you out. When you illegally sold the barbershop deed to that corrupt developer out from under him, I was the one who tracked the wire transfers. I was the one who bought the developer's debt and forced him into bankruptcy before he could demolish our legacy. And I was the one who funded Maya's auditing firm so she could systematically hunt down every single predatory loan you ever signed. Vivian lets out a whimpering sound, backing up until she hits the wall. She raises her hands defensively as if Silas might physically strike her. The realization that she spent a decade verbally abusing a man who secretly held a massive fortune completely breaks her spirit. She knows there is no talking her way out of this. There is no check she can write to make him forget the cruelty she inflicted upon him. But Silas is not finished. He slowly reaches into his tailored suit jacket and pulls out a small silver recording device. He holds it up, letting the metal catch the light. I am not just a silent partner, Calvin, Silas says, his voice dropping an octave, wrapping around the room like a steel chain. I am also a retired private investigator. And Jeremiah asked me to keep an eye on his real family. He looks pointedly at the shattered champagne glasses and then directly at Calvin's hands, which are still trembling by his sides. I have spent the last 5 years watching every single move you make, Silas states, his tone absolutely merciless. I watched you steal the adoption subsidy meant for Maya. I watched you forge the commercial real estate documents. And last night, I sat in a parked car across the street from Maya's apartment building and recorded high-definition infrared video of you crawling under her sedan with a pair of bolt cutters. Calvin's knees finally give out. The last remaining string holding his arrogant posture together completely snaps. He collapses backward into his leather chair, missing the armrest, and sliding awkwardly against the wood. His mouth opens and closes, but his vocal cords are paralyzed. He is completely trapped. The illusion is over. The SEC has Trevor, the fraud investigators have Vivian, and now a retired private investigator has crystal clear video evidence of Calvin committing attempted murder. I promised Jeremiah I would protect the only person in this family who actually deserved his legacy, Silas says, looking down at Calvin with absolute disgust. The trap is closed, Calvin. There are 3 federal agents waiting in the lobby downstairs. I suggest you straighten your tie. You have a very long afternoon ahead of you. You are bluffing, Calvin sneers, though his voice notably lacks the thunderous, commanding resonance it held just moments prior. The sudden intrusion of Silas, looking like a Wall Street titan, rather than the broken street sweeper they spent a decade mocking, has severely disrupted his equilibrium. But Calvin is a man who has survived entirely by doubling down on his own lies, never admitting defeat, even when cornered. He squares his shoulders, trying desperately to project the aura of a fearless chief executive. There is no video. You are a retired floor sweeper making wild defamatory accusations to extort a respected family. I will have you arrested for slander. Vivian immediately latches onto his denial, her survival instinct kicking into overdrive. "He is lying!" she shrieks, pointing a trembling manicured finger at Silas. "Look at him, Sterling. He is a vagrant playing dress-up. Maya probably hired him to come in here and put on a show because she knows her forged document will not hold up in probate court. We are leaving right now. We are leaving and we are calling the police." Despite her aggressive declaration, neither Calvin nor Vivian takes a single step toward the heavy oak doors. Their feet are firmly planted to the hardwood floor, anchored by the microscopic, terrifying possibility that Silas is telling the absolute truth. They are paralyzed by the sudden violent shift in the power dynamic. Silas does not yell. He does not offer a defensive retort. He does not engage in a petty shouting match with a woman who has spent her entire adult life perfecting the art of the hysterical temper tantrum. His silence is far more punishing than any insult he could possibly hurl. He simply turns his back on them. It is the ultimate display of dominant, unshakable authority. He walks toward the rear of the conference room with slow, measured steps. The thick, expensive Persian rug absorbs the sound of his polished leather shoes, but the sheer weight of his presence seems to rattle the glass walls. Mr. Sterling's conference room is designed for high-stakes corporate litigation and international board meetings. The entire back wall features a state-of-the-art audiovisual system seamlessly integrated into a dark mahogany credenza. Silas approaches the sleek control panel. He reaches into the breast pocket of his tailored Tom Ford suit and withdraws a small metallic flash drive. It catches the ambient light of the room, gleaming like a silver bullet. That tiny, insignificant-looking piece of metal holds the absolute destruction of the Sterling family legacy. Silas inserts the drive into the port. He taps a sequence of commands on the glass touch panel. Instantly, the heavy motorized blackout blinds on the conference room windows begin to descend with a quiet mechanical hum, blocking out the bright midday sun and plunging the room into a cool cinematic darkness. A massive 90-inch flat-screen monitor mounted flush against the wall flickers to life. The bright blue glow of the standby screen illuminates the room, casting long, harsh shadows across Calvin and Vivian's horrified faces. Then the video file engages. The image that fills the massive screen is not grainy, distorted, or pixelated. It is not the blurry, unreliable security footage commonly seen on late-night news reports. It is crisp, flawless 4K resolution captured through a high-end military-grade night vision lens. The scene displayed on the monitor is the private underground parking garage of my apartment building. The concrete pillars, the painted parking lines, and the low-hanging fluorescent lights are rendered with terrifying, razor-sharp clarity. The digital timestamp glowing in the bottom right corner of the screen reads exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The date displayed is exactly 2 days prior to this very will reading. The camera angle is perfectly positioned, providing a sweeping, unobstructed view of my silver Mercedes sedan resting in its assigned spot. For a few seconds, the screen shows nothing but the quiet, eerie stillness of an empty garage. Then the motion-activated sensor clicks on as a dark figure slinks into the frame. In the darkened boardroom, Calvin lets out a suffocated choking sound. His hands fly to the edge of the conference table, gripping the wood so hard his knuckles turn bone white. On the massive screen, there is absolutely no mistaking the identity of the trespasser. The crisp night vision illuminates Calvin's distinct facial features with undeniable perfection. He is wearing a dark cashmere zip-up sweater, black trousers, and expensive running shoes. It is a pathetic, laughable attempt at a burglar's outfit that still reeks of country club wealth and profound arrogance. He is creeping along the side of my car, looking over his shoulder with paranoid, jerky movements. He is holding a pair of massive, heavy-duty industrial bolt cutters. The bright yellow rubber grips of the tools stand out sharply in the high definition, contrast a glaring beacon of his lethal intent. The entire conference room watches in absolute paralyzed silence as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar manufacturing empire lowers himself onto the cold, oil-stained concrete of a parking garage. On the screen, Calvin slides awkwardly onto his back and shimmies clumsily beneath the undercarriage of my vehicle. The heavy metal of the bolt cutters drags against the concrete with a harsh, abrasive scraping noise. That is when the audio kicks in. Silas had not just relied on visual surveillance. He had anticipated their unique brand of ruthlessness and planted an advanced micro dashcam equipped with a highly sensitive omnidirectional microphone directly above my parking space. The sophisticated audio equipment captures the ambient sounds of the garage with chilling perfection. We can hear the distant dripping of condensation from the overhead pipes. We can hear the faint, muffled hum of street traffic above ground. And we can hear the heavy, panicked, labored breathing of Calvin struggling under the weight of the vehicle. Then a second figure steps cautiously into the frame on the monitor. It is Vivian. She is wearing a dark designer trench coat, her face partially obscured by a thick silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, but her rigid posture and her distinct aggressive gait are unmistakably hers. She is pacing nervously near a thick concrete pillar acting as a lookout, her eyes darting toward the garage entrance. And then her voice rings out through the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers of the conference room. The audio is crystal clear, echoing off the mahogany walls with devastating, undeniable perfection. Make sure you cut them all the way through, Calvin. Vivian's voice hisses from the speakers, vibrating with a cold, calculated malice that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Make sure she crashes before the reading. The words hang in the air inside the boardroom, wrapping around Vivian's throat like a physical noose. She did not just suggest a crime. She explicitly ordered a premeditated murder, dictating the timeline and the lethal method. And her chilling command has just been broadcast in pristine, high-fidelity audio directly in front of Mr. Sterling. The veteran estate lawyer who has spent his entire illustrious career drafting trusts and mitigating tax liabilities is completely paralyzed. He stares at the screen, his legal mind racing through the catastrophic implications of what he has just witnessed. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted vehicular manslaughter, willful destruction of property, fraud. He slowly backs away from the table, physically distancing himself from Calvin and Vivian as if their crimes are highly contagious. On the screen, Calvin grunts in affirmation. A second later, the sharp metallic snap of the heavy bolt cutters slicing through thick hydraulic brake lines echoes loudly through the speakers. A dark, viscous puddle of brake fluid immediately begins to pool on the concrete beneath the front tires of my car, confirming the lethal sabotage is complete. The two figures on the screen scramble away, disappearing into the shadows of the garage. Silas reaches out and presses a single button on the console. The video abruptly ends. The massive screen instantly cuts to black, casting the conference room back into a sudden, shadowy silence. The total absence of light and sound is entirely deafening. The silence presses against the eardrums, thick and suffocating. I slowly turn my gaze from the blank monitor to Vivian. The crushing reality of her situation crashes down upon her all at once. The impenetrable armor of her generational wealth, her elite social status, and her manufactured entitlement shatters into a million irreparable pieces. She has spent decades using her checkbook to bludgeon her way out of minor inconveniences, paying off social workers, silencing critics, and buying false respect. But there is no checkbook large enough to erase a 4K video of an attempted homicide. The realization strips away her arrogance, leaving behind nothing but raw, unfiltered terror. She is no longer an untouchable suburban matriarch. She is a criminal caught dead to rights on federal quality surveillance footage ordering the assassination of her own foster daughter. Vivian's knees literally give out beneath her. She collapses entirely, folding inward like a broken marionette whose strings have just been violently severed. Her back slides down the edge of the heavy leather chair, her manicured hands scrambling uselessly against the upholstery until she hits the hardwood floor. She lands hard, her designer dress crumpling around her. She clutches at her chest, her mouth opening and closing as she gasps desperately for air, completely unable to draw breath into her lungs. Calvin does not rush to help his wife. He does not look at the woman he just conspired with. His gaze remains fixed on the dark monitor, his reflection faintly visible in the polished glass of the screen. He looks hollow, a man who has just watched his own obituary broadcast in high definition. His entire empire has been reduced to ash in the span of 3 minutes. The ghost from the parking lot has finally delivered his judgment, and the execution is absolute. The massive 90-inch monitor remains a stark, pitch-black void dominating the conference room wall. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the immaculate space is the ragged, wet sound of Vivian struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs from the floor. Then the shock holding Calvin hostage finally shatters. His survival instinct kicks in, but it is completely detached from reality. He begins to hyperventilate, taking short, panicked gasps of air as he stumbles backward away from the blank screen, as if the monitor itself might reach out and strangle him. He runs his trembling hands over his sparse hair, leaving smeared streaks of spilled champagne and sweat across his forehead. He bumps hard into one of the heavy leather chairs, knocking it sideways, but he does not seem to notice. The impenetrable armor of the wealthy, untouchable chief executive has completely dissolved, leaving behind a frantic, babbling coward. "That is fake!" Calvin stammers, his voice pitching upward into a hysterical, grating register. "That is a deep fake. That is AI. You cannot prove that is me." He spins around wildly, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger directly at my face. She made that he shouts, his eyes wide and frantic. She hired some offshore computer hacker to generate that video. You know how advanced technology is these days, Sterling. You see it on the news all the time. She is trying to frame me. She wants the $45 million and she fabricated a federal crime to get it. That is not me under that car. Silas does not move a single muscle. He simply stands near the audiovisual controls, watching Calvin self-destruct, with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "I did not do it." Calvin continues, his voice cracking as the sheer magnitude of his impending incarceration begins to crush his chest. "And even if I did, even if that video was real, you heard the audio. Vivian is the one talking. You all heard her. She told me to do it. She told me to cut the lines. She orchestrated the entire thing. She is the mastermind. I was just following her instructions. She forced me into it." From her crumpled position on the hardwood floor, Vivian lets out a piercing, gut-wrenching wail of absolute ultimate betrayal. The man she has spent 3 decades defending, the man she conspired with to murder her own foster daughter, has just thrown her entirely under the bus without a second thought to save his own skin. Mr. Sterling does not look at Calvin with an ounce of sympathy. He looks at him with the profound, chilling disgust of a man who has just scraped something vile off the bottom of his shoe. Sterling has spent 3 decades building a pristine reputation in high-stakes estate law. He revered Grandpa Jeremiah. He viewed him as a paragon of hard work and honest integrity. The sudden, sickening revelation that Jeremiah's own flesh and blood attempted to murder a young woman out of pure, unadulterated greed is a bridge far too far. Mr. Sterling slowly reaches out and closes his thick leather binder. The heavy thud of the cover hitting the mahogany table sounds exactly like a judge's gavel, striking a sounding block ringing with absolute finality. "Calvin," Mr. Sterling says, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or professional courtesy. "As an officer of the court, I am legally obligated to report this. Silas provided me with this footage an hour ago." Calvin's mouth hangs open. His frantic pacing comes to an abrupt, crashing halt. He looks back and forth between the stoic lawyer and the towering former private investigator, his brain struggling to process the timeline of his own demise. "I reviewed the unedited, high-definition files in my private office before you even arrived in this building today," Mr. Sterling continues, his tone laced with a lethal, quiet authority. "I have already contacted the proper authorities. I forwarded the encrypted drive directly to the district attorney and the local police precinct. You are not dealing with a civil dispute over a real estate portfolio, Calvin. You are dealing with premeditated attempted murder. The officers waiting in the lobby with the federal agents are not here to ask polite questions about your corporate accounting. They are here to take you into custody." The color entirely drains from Calvin's face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. The trap has not just snapped shut, it has been welded closed. There is no high-priced defense attorney who can make a crystal-clear 4K video of a murder attempt disappear. There is no offshore bank account large enough to bribe a federal task force that is already waiting on the ground floor. The reality of a concrete cell and a metal toilet finally solidifies in his mind. Across the room, the final casualty of the Sterling family dynasty begins to stir. Vanessa is still collapsed on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remnants of her mother's crystal champagne glass. She is entirely, unequivocally abandoned. Trevor is gone, currently sprinting toward a private jet or an offshore haven to escape the Securities and Exchange Commission. Her parents are facing decades in federal and state prison for fraud and attempted homicide. The sprawling estate she grew up in, the luxury cars she paraded around town, the endless platinum credit cards she used to buy her friends, and her status, they are all instantly incinerated. She looks up at me. Her expensive designer mascara is running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. The arrogant, untouchable golden child who spent her entire youth making my life a living nightmare is gone. In her place is a terrified, desperate woman who has just realized she possesses absolutely zero survival skills and has absolutely zero assets to her name. She scrambles across the hardwood floor on her hands and knees. She does not care that the spilled champagne is soaking into her custom-tailored silk dress. She crawls until she reaches me, her trembling fingers reaching out and wrapping frantically around the hem of my tailored slacks. Maya, Vanessa begs, her voice breaking into pathetic, racking sobs. Maya, please. I didn't know about the car. I swear I didn't know they were going to do that to you. I look down at her. I remember being 15 years old, sitting at the kitchen table trying to study for a chemistry exam, while my stomach rumbled with hunger. Vanessa had walked past me, deliberately knocking my heavy textbook onto the floor, and whispered that nobody would ever love a broken, discarded foster kid. I remember her stealing the only photograph I had of my biological mother and burning it in the backyard fire pit just to watch me cry. I remember 1,000 tiny lethal cuts she inflicted upon me simply because she enjoyed watching me bleed. Now she is clinging to my leg, desperately trying to leverage a sisterhood that she spent 22 years treating like a contagious disease. We are family. Maya, she pleads, her grip tightening on my pants, her tears staining the fabric. We grew up in the exact same house. You know I would never want you dead. You have all that money now. The $45 million, the businesses, the commercial real estate. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I have no husband. I have no home. My parents are going to jail. Please, Maya, you are a good person. You are better than them. Please do not let me starve. I do not kick her away. I do not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the simmering rage that has fueled my entire existence for the past decade. I simply look down at her with the clinical freezing detachment of a senior auditor reviewing a permanently bankrupted ledger. I know you didn't know about the car, Vanessa. I state, my voice perfectly smooth and entirely hollow. You are entirely too self-absorbed to plan a murder. You have never thought about another human being for more than 5 consecutive seconds in your entire life. You didn't cut my brake lines because you simply didn't care if I lived or died as long as your monthly trust fund allowance cleared. I slowly reach down. I take her trembling hands in mine, and I peel her fingers off my slacks one by one with a deliberate, forceful motion. But you are still completely broke, I tell her, letting her hands drop back onto the cold hardwood floor. And I am not giving you a single cent. Vanessa lets out a hollow, defeated gasp, slumping fully against the floor as the absolute finality of her ruin washes over her. The room falls into a profound, heavy silence, punctuated only by the pathetic sounds of a family realizing their complete destruction is entirely their own fault. At the head of the mahogany table, Mr. Sterling clears his throat. He pushes his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose and opens a separate, much thinner manila folder. He prepares to read the final, unalterable line of Grandpa Jeremiah's will. The massive 90-inch monitor remains a stark, pitch-black void, dominating the conference room wall. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the immaculate space is the ragged, wet sound of Vivian struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs from the floor. Then, the shock holding Calvin hostage finally shatters. His survival instinct kicks in, but it is completely detached from reality. He begins to hyperventilate, taking short, panicked gasps of air as he stumbles backward away from the blank screen, as if the monitor itself might reach out and strangle him. He runs his trembling hands over his sparse hair, leaving smeared streaks of spilled champagne and sweat across his forehead. He bumps hard into one of the heavy leather chairs, knocking it sideways, but he does not seem to notice. The impenetrable armor of the wealthy, untouchable chief executive has completely dissolved, leaving behind a frantic, babbling coward. "That is fake," Calvin stammers, his voice pitching upward into a hysterical grating register. "That is a deep fake. That is AI. You cannot prove that is me." He spins around wildly, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger directly at my face. "She made that," he shouts, his eyes wide and frantic. "She hired some offshore computer hacker to generate that video. You know how advanced technology is these days, Sterling. You see it on the news all the time. She is trying to frame me. She wants the $45 million and she fabricated a federal crime to get it. That is not me under that car." Silas does not move a single muscle. He simply stands near the audiovisual controls, watching Calvin self-destruct with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "I did not do it," Calvin continues, his voice cracking as the sheer magnitude of his impending incarceration begins to crush his chest. "And even if I did, even if that video was real, you heard the audio. Vivian is the one talking. You all heard her. She told me to do it. She told me to cut the lines. She orchestrated the entire thing. She is the mastermind. I was just following her instructions. She forced me into it." From her crumpled position on the hardwood floor, Vivian lets out a piercing, gut-wrenching wail of absolute ultimate betrayal. The man she has spent 3 decades defending, the man she conspired with to murder her own foster daughter, has just thrown her entirely under the bus without a second thought to save his own skin. Mr. Sterling does not look at Calvin with an ounce of sympathy. He looks at him with the profound, chilling disgust of a man who has just scraped something vile off the bottom of his shoe. Sterling has spent 3 decades building a pristine reputation in high-stakes estate law. He revered Grandpa Jeremiah. He viewed him as a paragon of hard work and honest integrity. The sudden sickening revelation that Jeremiah's own flesh and blood attempted to murder a young woman out of pure, unadulterated greed is a bridge far too far. Mr. Sterling slowly reaches out and closes his thick leather binder. The heavy thud of the cover hitting the mahogany table sounds exactly like a judge's gavel, striking a sounding block, ringing with absolute finality. Calvin, Mr. Sterling, says, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or professional courtesy. "As an officer of the court, I am legally obligated to report this. Silas provided me with this footage an hour ago." Calvin's mouth hangs open. His frantic pacing comes to an abrupt, crashing halt. He looks back and forth between the stoic lawyer and the towering former private investigator, his brain struggling to process the timeline of his own demise. "I reviewed the unedited high-definition files in my private office before you even arrived in this building today," Mr. Sterling continues, his tone laced with a lethal, quiet authority. "I have already contacted the proper authorities. I forwarded the encrypted drive directly to the district attorney and the local police precinct. You are not dealing with a civil dispute over a real estate portfolio, Calvin. You are dealing with premeditated attempted murder. The officers waiting in the lobby with the federal agents are not here to ask polite questions about your corporate accounting. They are here to take you into custody." The color entirely drains from Calvin's face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. The trap has not just snapped shut, it has been welded closed. There is no high-priced defense attorney who can make a crystal-clear video of a murder attempt disappear. There is no offshore bank account large enough to bribe a federal task force that is already waiting on the ground floor. The reality of a concrete cell and a metal toilet finally solidifies in his mind. Across the room, the final casualty of the Sterling family dynasty begins to stir. Vanessa is still collapsed on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remnants of her mother's crystal champagne glass. She is entirely, unequivocally abandoned. Trevor is gone, currently sprinting toward a private jet or an offshore haven to escape the Securities and Exchange Commission. Her parents are facing decades in federal and state prison for fraud and attempted homicide. The sprawling estate she grew up in, the luxury cars she paraded around town, the endless platinum credit cards she used to buy her friends and her status, they are all instantly incinerated. She looks up at me. Her expensive designer mascara is running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. The arrogant, untouchable golden child who spent her entire youth making my life a living nightmare is gone. In her place is a terrified, desperate woman who has just realized she possesses absolutely zero survival skills and has absolutely zero assets to her name. She scrambles across the hardwood floor on her hands and knees. She does not care that the spilled champagne is soaking into her custom-tailored silk dress. She crawls until she reaches me, her trembling fingers reaching out and wrapping frantically around the hem of my tailored slacks. Maya Vanessa begs, her voice breaking into pathetic, racking sobs. Maya, please. I didn't know about the car. I swear I didn't know they were going to do that to you. I look down at her. I remember being 15 years old, sitting at the kitchen table trying to study for a chemistry exam while my stomach rumbled with hunger. Vanessa had walked past me, deliberately knocking my heavy textbook onto the floor, and whispered that nobody would ever love a broken, discarded foster kid. I remember her stealing the only photograph I had of my biological mother and burning it in the backyard fire pit just to watch me cry. I remember 1,000 tiny lethal cuts she inflicted upon me simply because she enjoyed watching me bleed. Now she is clinging to my leg, desperately trying to leverage a sisterhood that she spent 22 years treating like a contagious disease. We are family, Maya. She pleads, her grip tightening on my pants, her tears staining the fabric. We grew up in the exact same house. You know I would never want you dead. You have all that money now, the $45 million, the businesses, the commercial real estate. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I have no husband. I have no home. My parents are going to jail. Please, Maya, you are a good person. You are better than them. Please do not let me starve. I do not kick her away. I do not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the simmering rage that has fueled my entire existence for the past decade. I simply look down at her with the clinical, freezing detachment of a senior auditor reviewing a permanently bankrupted ledger. I know you didn't know about the car, Vanessa. I state, my voice perfectly smooth and entirely hollow. You are entirely too self-absorbed to plan a murder. You have never thought about another human being for more than 5 consecutive seconds in your entire life. You didn't cut my brake lines because you simply didn't care if I lived or died as long as your monthly trust fund allowance cleared. I slowly reach down. I take her trembling hands in mine, and I peel her fingers off my slacks one by one with a deliberate, forceful motion. But you are still completely broke, I tell her, letting her hands drop back onto the cold hardwood floor. And I am not giving you a single cent. Vanessa lets out a hollow, defeated gasp, slumping fully against the floor as the absolute finality of her ruin washes over her. The room falls into a profound, heavy silence, punctuated only by the pathetic sounds of a family realizing their complete destruction is entirely their own fault. At the head of the mahogany table, Mr. Sterling clears his throat. He pushes his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose and opens a separate, much thinner manila folder. He slides a single sheet of heavy cream-colored parchment onto the polished wood. He looks directly at me. There is a profound, solemn respect in his eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement of the sheer hell I have survived to reach this exact moment. I am legally obligated to execute the final directives of Jeremiah Sterling's estate. Mr. Sterling announces, his voice projecting with formal, unyielding authority. This document constitutes the final, irrevocable codicil to his last will and testament, drafted and witnessed mere weeks before his passing. Mr. Sterling looks down at the parchment and begins to read. To my adoptive granddaughter, Maya, Mr. Sterling reads, his voice carrying the deep, comforting cadence of Grandpa Jeremiah himself. The words immediately send a warm, unexpected shockwave through my chest. To Maya, who learned the absolute value of hard work while being denied love. To the girl who spent her evenings sweeping the floors of my barber shop, not for an allowance, but simply for the quiet company of an old man. To the brilliant young woman who saw the true worth in a dilapidated building when everyone else only saw decay. Mr. Sterling pauses for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of the sentiment fill the room. I leave my entire remaining fortune. Mr. Sterling continues reading the legally binding text with absolute precision. I leave the entirety of my business, holdings, my commercial real estate portfolios, and my liquid cash trust. Everything I have built, everything I have saved, and everything I have preserved is hereby transferred to Maya. May she use it to build a life of genuine substance completely free from the shadows of this family. The lawyer takes a slow, measured breath before reading the final sentence. To my biological son Calvin and his wife Vivian, Mr. Sterling reads his tone dropping into a cold, clinical register. I leave nothing but the consequences of their own actions. May the universe grant them exactly what they have earned. Mr. Sterling closes the folder. The sharp, decisive thud of the cardboard cover hitting the mahogany table seals their fate forever. Hearing Grandpa Jeremiah's final words, hearing his official, legally documented validation of my struggle breaks something deep inside me. For 22 years, I was forced to carry the heavy, suffocating burden of being the family scapegoat. I was the target of every misplaced frustration, the designated punching bag for Calvin's towering insecurities, and Vivian's venomous narcissism. I thought Grandpa Jeremiah was just a kind observer, a gentle man who offered me a quiet refuge, but remained blind to the true extent of the psychological warfare being waged against me. But he saw everything. He saw the skipped dinners, the locked doors, the threadbare clothes I was forced to wear while Vanessa flaunted designer labels. He recognized the insidious systemic abuse I endured. He saw my resilience. He saw my worth. He saw me. A single tear breaks free from the corner of my eye. It tracks slowly down my cheek, feeling incredibly warm against my cold skin. I do not wipe it away. I let it fall. It is the only tear I have shed during this entire agonizing ordeal. It is not a tear of sorrow or grief. It is a profound, overwhelming release of a decades-old burden. It is the physical manifestation of ultimate vindication. On the other side of the room, the finality of the will shatters whatever fragile, microscopic thread of sanity Vivian was still clinging to. The reality of her total destitution crashes down upon her. The $45 million is gone. The commercial properties are gone. The luxurious suburban mansion will inevitably be seized to pay off the staggering mountain of fraudulent debt Calvin has accumulated. They have absolutely nothing left to trade, nothing left to sell, and nothing left to leverage. Vivian lets out a desperate, strangled gasp. She pushes herself up from the floor, her hands slipping in the puddle of expensive champagne. Her custom-tailored designer dress is soaked, ruined, and clinging awkwardly to her frame. Her expensive salon-styled hair is a tangled, chaotic mess. Thick, dark streaks of expensive waterproof mascara are running down her cheeks, making her look like a terrifying, tragic clown. She does not try to stand. She crawls. The wealthy, arrogant matriarch who spent her entire life looking down her nose at service workers and demanding to speak to the manager is now scrambling across the expensive Persian carpet on her hands and knees. She crawls past the shattered crystal, ignoring the sharp shards of glass, dragging her ruined dress across the floor until she reaches my feet. She lunges forward, her hands grasping desperately at my ankles. Her manicured fingernails dig into the fabric of my tailored slacks. "Maya, please!" Vivian shrieks, her voice completely stripped of its usual haughty, refined modulation. It is a raw, guttural sound of pure terror. "Maya, please. You cannot do this to us. You cannot take everything." I stand perfectly still, staring down at the woman who made my childhood a living nightmare. I feel the frantic, pathetic grip of her hands around my ankles, and I feel absolutely nothing. "We gave you a home," Vivian wails, tilting her ruined, mascara-stained face up to look at me. Her eyes are wide, wild, and begging. "We took you in when nobody else wanted you. We fed you. We clothed you. We are family, Maya. You owe us. You cannot just throw your own family away." The sheer audacity of her gaslighting is staggering. Even now, facing federal prison and absolute financial ruin, she instinctively reaches for the weapon of emotional manipulation. She actually believes she can rewrite history in the final seconds before her arrest. I slowly reach down. I place my hands over her trembling, desperate fingers, and I pry them off my ankles one by one. I use a slow, deliberate, unyielding force, pushing her hands away until she drops back onto the carpet. I take one step backward, physically removing myself from her toxic orbit forever. "You did not give me a home, Vivian. I state, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal whisper that cuts through her frantic sobbing. You provided a physical structure funded entirely by monthly state subsidy checks. You took in a grieving, traumatized child strictly for the financial stipend and the tax deductions. You used my presence to boost your philanthropic image at your pathetic country club luncheons while forcing me to eat expired leftovers in the kitchen. Vivian shakes her head violently, covering her ears as if she can block out the truth. You did not clothe me. I continue, my words falling like heavy, unforgiving stones. You gave me Vanessa's discarded, stained hand-me-downs while you spent thousands of dollars outfitting her for meaningless high school social events. You treated me like an unpaid servant, a convenient punching bag, and a perpetual burden. You are not my family. You never were. Family protects each other. Family does not plot to sever brake lines in a parking garage at 2 in the morning. Vivian opens her mouth to scream, to offer another pathetic, fabricated excuse, but the sound dies in her throat. In the corridor outside the conference room, a new sound begins to build. It is not the soft, muffled shuffle of corporate lawyers or the quiet hum of clerical staff. It is the heavy, synchronized, rhythmic thud of tactical boots marching across the polished marble floors. The sound vibrates through the heavy mahogany walls, echoing with undeniable, terrifying authority. Silas, who has been standing silently by the audiovisual controls like a watchful sentinel, turns his head toward the entrance. He reaches out with a large, steady hand and grips the polished brass handle of the heavy oak doors. He looks back at Calvin, who is completely paralyzed in his chair, and gives him a slow, grim nod. The consequences have arrived, Silas says, his deep voice rumbling through the room. Silas pushes down on the brass handle and pulls the heavy double doors wide open. Standing perfectly framed in the doorway are 3 uniformed police officers, flanked by a stern-faced federal agent in a dark suit. The lead officer steps into the room, his hand resting casually on his utility belt, holding a thick stack of official court-stamped arrest warrants. The lead officer steps fully into the room, his hand resting casually on his utility belt, holding a thick stack of official court-stamped arrest warrants. 2 other heavily armed officers flank him, their expressions carved from stone, while the federal agent steps to the side, sealing off any possible avenue of escape. The atmosphere in the boardroom instantly plummets from tense to absolutely suffocating. Calvin and Vivian Sterling, the lead officer, announces, his voice booming with absolute authority, echoing off the mahogany walls and shattering the last remaining illusion of their elite corporate invincibility. You are under arrest for attempted vehicular manslaughter, conspiracy to commit murder, and federal wire fraud. The words drop like anvils onto the polished conference table. For a fraction of a second, the room is entirely suspended in time. Then Calvin's deeply ingrained survival instinct completely short-circuits. The man who has spent his entire life orchestrating hostile takeovers, manipulating board members, and bullying his subordinates suddenly devolves into a panicked, cornered animal. He does not try to negotiate. He does not ask to call his attorney. He simply bolts. Calvin scrambles out of his leather chair, kicking it backwards so violently that it crashes to the floor. He spins toward the side door of the conference room, his eyes wide and unseeing, driven entirely by blind, irrational terror. But his body betrays him. The adrenaline dumping into his system overwhelms his legs. His expensive Italian leather shoes hit the puddle of spilled champagne on the hardwood floor, entirely eliminating his traction. His feet fly out from under him. He hits the ground with a sickening heavy thud, his shoulder slamming into the edge of the credenza. Before he can even attempt to push himself back up, the 2 flanking officers are on him. They move with practiced, ruthless efficiency. One officer drives a knee firmly into the center of Calvin's back, pinning the CEO flat against the floorboards. The other officer grabs Calvin's flailing arms, wrenching them behind his back. "Get your hands off me!" Calvin screams, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch, completely devoid of dignity. "I am the CEO of Sterling Manufacturing. You do not know who you are dealing with. I will have your badges. I will sue this entire department into the ground. You have the right to remain silent." The officer recites completely. ignoring Calvin's frantic threats as the cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snaps securely around his wrists. The metallic click echoes sharply in the room, a sound of absolute irrevocable finality. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Across the room, Vivian is faring no better. The lead officer approaches her where she is still sprawled on the carpet near my feet. He reaches down, grasping her by the upper arm to haul her up. "Do not touch me!" Vivian shrieks, thrashing wildly. She kicks out her designer heels, catching the edge of the table as she fights the officer's grip. Her impeccable facade is entirely destroyed. Her hair is plastered to her tear-stained face, and her heavy mascara has smeared into dark, chaotic patches around her eyes. She looks like a terrifying, unhinged specter. The officer effortlessly pulls her to her feet, spinning her around and securing her wrists in handcuffs with a swift, practiced motion. The restrictive metal bites into her wrists, finally forcing the reality of the situation into her manic brain. She is not going to a country club luncheon. She is not going back to her sprawling suburban mansion. She is going to a concrete holding cell. Vivian twists her neck, locking her wild, desperate eyes onto me. She is hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she tries one final pathetic attempt at emotional extortion. "Maya, please," Vivian cries, her voice breaking into a ragged, breathless sob. "Tell them to stop. We gave you a home. We took you in when nobody else wanted you. We fed you. We clothed you. We are family. You owe us." I look down at the woman who spent 22 years treating me like a disposable commodity. I look at the woman who demanded perfection while constantly reminding me of my fundamental unworthiness. I look at the woman who just 48 hours ago stood in a freezing parking garage and ordered my death simply to protect her stolen wealth. I feel no pity. I feel no residual loyalty. The towering inferno of anger that has burned inside me for decades has finally burned itself out, leaving behind a foundation of solid, unbreakable steel. "You gave me a roof, Vivian." I state, my voice perfectly steady, carrying a quiet, lethal calm that completely silences her hysterics. "I built my own home. And as for family, you lost that privilege the day you decided my life was worth less than a paycheck." The words strike her with physical force. Her mouth drops open, but no sound comes out. The ultimate realization that she has entirely lost control over me, over her fortune, and over her own life finally extinguishes the fight inside her. Her shoulders slump forward. Her chin drops to her chest. She is a hollow, broken shell of a woman. "Take them out," the lead officer commands. The officers haul Calvin and Vivian toward the heavy oak doors. Calvin is still weeping openly, dragging his feet as they pull him down the hallway. Vivian shuffles beside him, staring blankly at the floor. They are paraded out of the conference room, their legacy of greed and cruelty ending in the back of a police cruiser. In the corner of the room, Vanessa remains curled into a tight ball on the floor. She is trembling violently, her face buried in her knees, completely ignored by everyone. She is entirely irrelevant now, a footnote in the collapse of her parents' empire. She has absolutely nothing left, and she knows it. Mr. Sterling stands at the head of the table. He calmly straightens his tie, gathers his documents, and places them neatly back into his leather briefcase. He looks up at me and offers a slow, deeply respectful nod. He is acknowledging the transfer of power. I am no longer the victimized ward of the Sterling family. I am the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar empire. I turn my back on the conference room. I do not spare a single glance for Vanessa, nor do I look at the overturned chairs or the spilled champagne. I walk out of the heavy oak doors, the sharp click of my heels echoing down the marble corridor. Every step I take feels lighter than the last. The oppressive, suffocating weight of the Sterling family name has been permanently lifted from my shoulders. I step into the elevator, press the button for the lobby, and watch the doors slide shut, sealing the past away forever. When the elevator reaches the ground floor, I walk through the expansive glass lobby and step out through the revolving doors. The bright, crisp afternoon sun immediately hits my face. The air smells clean and sharp, entirely devoid of the toxic, stagnant atmosphere of the boardroom. I take a deep, grounding breath, letting the absolute reality of my freedom wash over me. Silas is waiting by the curb. He is leaning casually against the sleek, polished frame of my silver Mercedes sedan. He looks incredibly imposing in his tailored suit, a silent, powerful guardian who helped orchestrate the ultimate reckoning. As I approach, he stands up straight and offers me a warm, incredibly proud smile. The fierce, intimidating glare he directed at Calvin is completely gone, replaced by a deep paternal warmth that reminds me instantly of Grandpa Jeremiah. We had the car towed to a secure garage immediately after I secured the footage, Silas explains, his deep voice carrying a comforting rumble. My mechanics replaced the brake lines, flushed the system, and ran a complete top-to-bottom diagnostic inspection. It is entirely safe to drive. He reaches out and tosses a heavy set of keys toward me. I catch them easily in my right hand, the cool metal pressing into my palm. "Thank you, Silas," I say, meaning it more than words can properly express. "For everything. For keeping your promise to him. For watching my back when I did not even know you were there." "Jeremiah believed in you, Maya," Silas replies, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "He knew exactly what they were, and he knew exactly what you could become. You have a massive portfolio to manage now. When you are ready to review the commercial leases and transition the accounts, call me. I will be here. I will call you tomorrow morning, I promise," returning his smile. "We have a lot of work to do." I walk around to the driver's side of the Mercedes. I open the door and slide into the familiar, comfortable leather seat. The interior smells of clean upholstery and fresh air. I push the ignition button, and the engine roars to life with a smooth, powerful hum. There are no warning lights on the dashboard. The vehicle is perfect. I do not look back at the towering corporate building. I do not look back at the place where Calvin and Vivian's empire officially died. I put the car in drive, check my mirrors, and pull smoothly away from the curb, merging into the steady flow of afternoon traffic. I navigate through the busy downtown streets, heading away from the wealthy, manicured suburbs that served as my prison for so long. I drive toward the older working-class neighborhood on the south side of the city. I drive toward the brick storefronts, the narrow sidewalks, and the places where real people build real lives. I pull up to the curb and park directly in front of the ancestral barbershop. The faded gold lettering on the glass window catches the afternoon sun. The building looks exactly the way it did 10 years ago. It is quiet, unassuming, and entirely mine. It is the cornerstone of a massive hidden empire that I now control. I turn off the engine and sit in the silence for a moment, letting the absolute magnitude of my future settle over me. The abuse is over. The manipulation is finished. The Sterling family has been destroyed by their own toxic greed. It is time to rebuild Grandpa Jeremiah's legacy, and I am going to do it entirely on my own terms. The most profound lesson to learn from this story is that true security and personal value never come from those who demand your submission. Family is defined by mutual respect, loyalty, and unconditional support, not by shared blood or toxic obligations. When you are surrounded by manipulative people who constantly belittle your achievements and exploit your kindness, the absolute bravest thing you can do is walk away. Reclaiming your independence and building a life on your own terms is the ultimate victory. Never let anyone else dictate your worth. Have you ever survived a similar situation? Please share it below.